All right. In theory, we are live on the internet right now.
Awesome.
For those of you that may be here, because I saw some people waiting in chat, we'll see. We'll see if anyone actually shows up. It doesn't say anyone yet, but if it's just derpy derp, then hello and welcome. With me today is Dlatrex. That's I believe how you
Wow,
say
you
it.
can actually pronounce it.
Uh, so thank you for I will probably call you Andy. The rest, otherwise, my
I
throat.
do also go by Andy. Yes.
Yep. And we have no particular plan today other than nerd out about swords and talk about things that we like, which are sharp and shiny and pointy. So I will endeavor not to suck at chat, but probably fail in that effort, as is tradition at this point. If you have questions, throw them in there. I see there's some early ones. And also,
Oh,
I'm smart. I have a channel with my real name on it, and I hopped on the internet with a guest live while I am a little bit under the weather. So I will try to mute myself for any spontaneous bouts of coughing or sneezing. If I need to blow my nose and end up with a giant boogie across my face, please nobody say anything and let that live on the internet forever. Let's just continue, an articulate and educated view upon swords with a guy with a giant snot rocket hanging out. That'll be fantastic. Or you could tell me. Either way, it's fine. So
just know how to make good TV. Yeah.
yeah. What is it? You're the swordy snot rocket guy, right? Like that's how I'm hoping to be known in the future. Andy's channel is linked in the description down below. Go check him out, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. But maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, what got you into swords, what
Sure.
you like talking about on the internet.
Yeah. So as Matthew was so kind to mention, I do go by Dlatrex or Andy. You can pronounce the channel name however you like. I have been collecting swords for more than 20 years now in earnest. I say earnest because I think that the first serious sword I got, I'll go and pick it up when we take a break, but I still have it. It's an old Hanway Practical Wakizashi, so it would probably have been under Paul Chen since it was around 2000, I'm guessing, is when I picked that one up. But even though I've been collecting for that long, I really only take my study of swords seriously probably for the last 5 or 6 years. Been following guys like yourself and Skull probably and Matt Easton more getting into things from around 09, maybe 2010, and then getting my hands more dirty in buying and trading antiques again, probably for the last 5 or 6 years. And so continuing to do that, I'm pretty much like to consume all swords. I don't really have a big focus. There are certainly areas where I am more comfortable talking and discussing swords, and other areas where my knowledge is thinner than it should be. But I like to describe myself as a filthy generalist and a backyard historian and backyard cutter. I'm not a fencer by any stretch. So I always say, do not watch my channel if you want to learn how to do swordplay. That there are plenty of other guys out there who can teach you swordsmanship. I've been doing cutting for a long time, so I can cut very well. But if you want to learn how to sword fight against someone else who knows how to sword fight, my channel is a terrible place to learn how to do that. So instead, if you want to learn about what different shapes of swords are and how the dynamic properties of swords work, that's kind of what we do. We nerd out on history and sword design and dynamic functions, I'd say, mostly on my page.
As a person stumbling their way through martial arts myself, I can sympathize, empathize, relate to. Don't watch my channel if you're trying to actually. That's at least not about how to move it. You can see how not to. You can see.
Yeah.
If you two are clumsy, then you can see what you would look like. But it reminds me of like the American Idol guys, that think they can sing, and just putting it out there.
There's nothing more humbling than watching footage of yourself try and perform a kata or perform some technique that you've just learned and think that you're particularly good at, and or haven't helped you actually performing in a combative sort of situation against a resisting opponent?
It's it's kind of like quadruple, I would imagine, for us. 'Cause, so in the event that you're studying a martial art, right,
Mm,
you do it in front of a mirror and you can see,
mm,
oh, here's how I'm moving. I think I'm in a line, I'm not, or well, you can see yourself and you can correct a little bit easier because you're more aware of what you're doing. And then there's watching it on video, trying to reflect on it after the moment. And you're like, oh, I thought I did that well, but
mm,
I definitely, I definitely did not. And then there's like, I'm trying to learn it. I know I'm recording something to put myself out on the internet,
mm.
right? Like I'm like, this is for public consumption. And then I record myself doing it and I'm like, oh, that is all the things I was told not to do. And I have to watch it and like edit it and like make the sound correct and zoom into my dumb face while I do it.
Yeah.
And then I have to like render it and like watch it
Mm,
slowly go frame by
mm,
frame
mm,
as my
mm.
failure is just cemented in the internet forever. And then, not a lot of people comment on it like, hey, I see what you're trying to do and you suck at it. I mean, sometimes they do, but not as often as is probably warranted. And so, I appreciate the grace that I'm given, but
Yeah.
I do think it's funny. Like I'm at least aware that I'm not
Mm,
good. I had to take several steps to publish my failures on the internet.
mm.
It's great. It's
But
great.
I really do appreciate both the way that you do it with humility and candor. I try and do that to some degree. There's a bit of a balancing act because to at least the approach that I have with the content that I put out, I usually try and do it with the idea that, okay, what am I doing to further the conversation and understanding we have? Because I'm approaching it kind of from a historical sort of perspective. And you have to be a little compact about what you're doing when you're editing things and putting it together. You have to, you can't just put your raw footage up there with hours and hours of pauses and blank space. But at the same point, you can be giving a false sense of what's actually going on, because if I present the one strike that I have with a really nice clean cut and everyone comments, oh man, you make this look so easy, I'm like, well, how many attempts did I make before I landed the cut that's up there? And so I think that outtakes or what have you have an important role, aside from just the comedic value, because it's always wonderful to see me make a fool of myself. And there was recently, I was not too recently, but I did a comparison between an Albion Clontarf and a Hanway Tinker 9th century Viking sword. And I used the Hanway first against some soda bottles, so just pop bottles. And I was getting a good feel for what it could do and couldn't do. And I knew the Albion handled similarly. So after I had used the Hanway, I had a feel for how much emphasis I needed to put in order to make the soda bottle strike. And I went through the Albion, which didn't have an edge on it. It wasn't apex; it just had a nice geometry. And I put about the amount of effort I thought I needed to make the cut, and it cut perfectly cleanly. But it had so little resistance that I completely overshot the target and I grounded the sword straight into the dirt. And I didn't catch it on film. The camera was off. So it was beautiful. I would have loved to include that even as just a blooper, but it was just, ooh, and just buried the sword, 4 inches into the dirt, because I wasn't expecting to have so little resistance in the target.
Those that's kind of the plight of the content
Yeah.
creator.
Yeah.
Because when you're like, on one hand, I like using a sword and I try to concentrate, and
Mhm.
trying to film myself doing anything
Mm.
removes constant, like I have to think about, is the camera in focus? Did I put it on the right, like, face focus tracky setting? Did I, is the new one overheats really quickly? So like there's all manner of things in terms of framing and where can I stand and what, that I also have to keep in mind because I'm filming it. And it absolutely makes it harder to learn, and removes me, and like makes, I sometimes go into back into Hulk smash mode. So in the event that I perform well and it's consistent, then I usually pull that out, honestly. Nobody would believe it. They'd think I edited it if I just put if I put footage out where 3 mats in a row, I have very consistent angles where they should be. They'd be like, no, Matt, that's some bullshit. You photoshopped that. Some sort of AI thing going on. And while I will admit it happens sparsely, it has happened, and I just don't use the footage. But most of the time, there's some good cuts mixed in with some really, really awful ones. And the Hulk smashness of trying to concentrate on recording myself and not having the camera tip over, which really makes you mad when it happens. Anyway, that's a different point. Having all that going on at the same time means that my capability is diminished. And I think a competent cutter can look at somebody bad and say, oh, I can pick apart what's useful in the sword, how it will perform, what it will do better or worse, because you've cut with a lot of stuff. You're very good at it. You're experienced and know how this sword may be beneficial to you. But other people that just like to whack shit in their backyard, seeing somebody fumble through it is arguably more useful. Phil Martin, for example, it's kind of a joke that if you give him a spork, he can cut through it.
Yeah.
In fairness, I want to give him one of these Benihana spatulas, where they're really, really thin, and just have him sharpen aside and literally see him cut with a spatula.
I'm convinced he'd be able to clear 2 tatami with a pizza spatula or something like that.
Yeah,
Phil, if you're watching this, you are the man. There's nothing you can't cut with, I'm convinced.
Yeah, that's he may see it and be like, I do not think I can cut with a spatula. That is, that is unlikely, gentlemen. But I bet if he sharpened the spatula, boy could cut with a spatula. A spork might be, honestly, the thing is, if Phil cut with a plastic spork, you give him some Taco Bell, he opens up the bag, it has a spork for whatever reason, he throws it away and then cuts the tatami mat with the taco. That I wouldn't honestly be all that surprised by. I'd be like, yeah. I mean, I kind of knew you were gonna do it though. You're like the superhero that wins all the time, it's not. Yep, I knew it was gonna. I knew that you were gonna cut a tatami mat with Taco Bell, soft shell taco. Even just you're gonna move through the mat with a soft shell taco better than I can with a multi-$1,000 item specifically geared towards cutting tatami. That's
no, again, we need to have him there to keep the rest of us in our place so that we know where we are in the pecking order.
Yep. He's like the Bill Brasky of Phil Martin invented November. Anyway, sorry. I caught the mute button before I went off.
No, that's good. You're ready for radio. You got fast reflexes.
Yeah, that's it's a great time to have me read off your voicemail if anyone still leaves though. So, just have the message be like, hey, nobody leaves voicemails anymore. Fuck off. That's.
Does your voice get real deep if you get a head cold?
Yeah.
About once or twice a year, I'll get a URI, an upper respiratory infection, and my voice always leaves. I can't usually get very deep tones, but when I get a cold, then I'll drop, pitch half an octave or something like that. So
it's all sorts of fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Hope you recover quickly. Thanks for sticking with it. If we have to wrap at any point, we'll wrap.
No, it's not painful as much as just kind of funny. I want to sing out some Barry White lyrics or something.
Yeah,
exactly. I just
can't get enough of your love.
Yeah, that's it feels like the time to have some serenade tones. The voice that can make a Wolverine purr. It could be worse. If it went the other way and it sounded like the Pillsbury Doughboy or something. Yeah. It's let's talk about swords. that would probably be weirder. Anyway, If I could cut like Phil Martin, I could pull it off, but I
Yeah.
can't. Anyway, well, I will shimmy over to some questions here, and
Yeah.
not to be as terrible at chat as is typical for me. Curious about the difference in feel between the Imperial Guard Chong Dao,
Chong Dao. Yeah. Good pronunciation.
Silver Swallow, the Striking Eagle, and the Western two-hander like the Maximilian.
All right. So have you had your hands on any of the big two-handed Chinese swords before?
No, I think I did not.
So
No, not that I think. I had a Meow Dao from a different company. It was very light, and I enjoyed it quite a bit more than the Maximilian. It had a longer reach. The handle was also longer, just an entirely different weapon. Now, the Maximilian, if I was running into a pike formation and needed things to move, it felt a bit sturdier, like I could do that. But if like a horse was running at me and I wanted to clip its legs, I'd rather have the Meow Dao because I could be further away, and like I don't need to do stuff. So different strokes, different folks. But I don't know the other ones. LK Chen stopped sending me stuff, but I think they got mad at me for breaking it all. So
oh no, we can't send him to this dangerous man.
Stop doing that crazy man things. Yeah, I've not
part of the deal.
The last LK Chen piece that I got was the Kriegsmaster, but the Cult of Athena sent that to me.
Right. So
LK
that's the
Chen
partnership with the Valor Arms. And you did break that one up, I seem to recall. You put the guard through its paces for sure.
Yes, that is accurate. So I've tried to move away a little bit from breaking everything because people find it useful and people get mad at me at the same time. There seems to be about a 50-50 distribution. And initially, like the main drive behind breaking everything was it made me feel guilty to have something of value at the end of the video. Like I just didn't like it. And so, don't ask me for stuff because I get asked every day and the answer was always no, but I would give them away to like other content creators, other folks. But then people started asking me like, hey, what about this and that? Just like this question I read off. And I was like, well, shit, if I hadn't broke it, or
then you could actually do a comparison.
Then I could probably answer some of these questions better. So I've stopped breaking everything. I still do break some things, but it's less time consuming, quite a bit safer, and allows me to shift some content. So LK Chen, I will push them though. And so that was kind of the attempt to do there. And I whacked some pretty aggressive targets with the thin parts of the blade, as I recall. And those held up surprisingly well. And then the guard did, it flexed a little bit more than it should have, and the nagel fell out. But like I equated that one a little bit to like copying Cold Steel's homework. Like you should have the Lance Connecting Point.
Right. So that one, of course, Kyle from Alientude probably has the most extensive discussion on the history of that particular Kriegsmesser. So now a retired design, and will be getting replaced soon. But it's interesting to see how it came out. It's pretty, but as you pointed out, it probably could use a little bit more beefing up in some of the hilt components. About that specific question, I think I have all of those swords on hand. LK Chen and I have a pretty close working relationship by this point. So what were the swords? The Chong Dao, the Silver Swallow, and I think the Striking Eagle was?
You are correct.
Yeah.
If there was a game of like the turn over the cards and make a match, I would partner with you.
If you'll humor me for 1 second, I'll actually just grab, I think they're right next to me. Okay. So once upon a time when I was just watching guys like Lindy Beige and Scala Gladiatoria, etc., before I had met Keith from Scholar General, I didn't know much about Chinese weaponry at all, and somehow I backed up into studying them quite extensively. So now I wouldn't call myself an expert on Chinese swords, but I know a lot more about them than perhaps some of the other sword groups that I study. So I've worked with Peter Decker to try and come up with typologies, especially for the like post-Mongol conquest Ming through Republic era dynasties. So this one on top is the Republic Silver Swallow, and the one on the bottom is the Imperial Guard Changdao by L.K. Chen. And both of them are really long, but they're made for different periods. So the Changdao is closer to the role that the Maximilian holds. It's long and it's heavy, and it's really a battlefield weapon for armored combat against other big, heavy, clunky things. It's not clunky in and of itself. It's actually balances very nimbly, and I'm surprised for as big and heavy. It's 2.5 kilos altogether in weight.
What's that in freedom units?
And freedom units, it's gonna trying to catch me here off the bat. It's gonna be 5 point something 5.5 pounds, I think, 5.5 pounds. And then this one is basically, there's a debate as to if they were ever used for war. There's some discussion that there were some early 20th century military units that had big sabers like this, but it's basically a dedicated wushu martial arts type weapon. So it's long and it can be used to oppose things like spear, but it's really for a time when armor was retired, when guns are on the battlefield, and it's really good against lightly armored targets and a lot swifter and more maneuverable than something like the Chongdao. So I'd say that even though it's almost as long, even though it almost has the reach of the Maximilian, it's a lot lighter and faster a weapon. In cutting power, it when I'm doing them against static targets, it might only cut about half as deeply as the Chongdao. The striking eagle is again almost as long, but it's a lot lighter than a European greatsword. It doesn't have as much hilt protection. It's because it can accelerate more quickly. It'll be more maneuverable. It won't be able to oppose things as heavy as a European greatsword because it doesn't have as much mass. So it will be able to deliver similar amount of power in the strike, not because of the inertia in the blade, but because you'll be able to get it going more swiftly. But it potentially wouldn't be able to be used in as aggressive blocks or deflections as a similar length European greatsword. That would be my assessment. Again, I haven't played with the Maximilian, so I can't do a one-to-one comparison. Kane Shen, I think, has done a good comparison video on specifically the Striking Eagle and the Maximilian.
Okay. Yeah, we'll check that out. That's another sword tuber worth checking out, Kane, if he's talked about the difference between some old, very long swords. The Miao Dao is one that I don't mind moving around, though. I really had fun with it, and it felt familiar. I felt like I could do movements with it that were not wildly different. And somebody, when I talked about the Maximilian, said like, yeah, it won't feel like an extension. It should feel like a dancing partner. And I was like, yeah, I'm terrible at dancing. Like that all checks out. But like that struck a chord with me. That, yeah, it won't move like an extension. But the Miao Dao, which is that I have, which isn't an LK Chen variety, it kind of feels like it could kind of play either role. The length means that like sometimes with some fluid movement, you have to kind of use momentum. But at the same time, it's light enough where you can kind of start and stop it like a sword that you might be more familiar with. To your point, though, yeah, wouldn't want to try, like if somebody was swinging something at me, wouldn't want to try and block with it. If I did, I wouldn't expect it to hold up particularly well. And in terms of cutting, like you can really get devastating cuts by speed, but like even they're effective enough would be kind of the thing versus something like the Maximilian that feels like it'll kind of charge through mats, and if it
Yeah.
doesn't cut them, it'll break them in half. It's as much percussive as it is slicey.
Yeah.
Um,
Out of curiosity, I know that you have much more experience with katana and Japanese swords in general. Have you worked with other longer than typical Iaito size katana much before, going
yeah,
into
so
larger katana or nodachi size blades?
the swords that I prefer to use are
Mm.
usually around like 29.5 inches is about as much as you can get, but that
Yeah.
doesn't typically include the habaki. So
Mm.
that adds another inch. So it'd be a little over 30 inches would be the kind of effective blade length from the guard that I'd be talking about. And that's what I would say my most common length is in terms of like what I would use on an Iaito myself. Um, and then I try to get longer swords. They're just really tough to find. So 32 inches is
Mm.
of blade length, so 33 inches in total length is about as far as I like to push it, which is usually in Okatana territory.
Hmm.
Most of the time, though, those reproductions tend to be cumbersome, and so they're not 5 pounds, but just they haven't felt particularly good. And
Mm.
I haven't had a chance to play with all of them, but the ones that I have played with were I was not impressed. So yeah, but they can be made well. There are a couple longer swords like the what is it, Dragon King Winter Sun, that was like
Mm.
30 and a half, and then I had a different one that was like 31 and a half. So
Mm.
31 and a half to 32 and a half if you factor in the usually 1 inch habaki that's in there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that was not an overly heavy beastly sword, and was not bad. So I've played with those, but then also nagamaki and some
Mm.
nodachi as well. So those are bigger, different cleavy
Yeah.
weapons. In fairness, the nagamaki that I've played with primarily have been the Cold Steel and Dynasty Forge variety
Mm.
that are somewhat analogous to one another, and they don't feel good. They're
Yeah.
imposing looking. Like if Conan the Barbarian were a Japanese guy, it would be that he used something like in that profile. But they're not particularly fun to move. Um, they tend to be cumbersome and weird in a different way. And so I've only recently got a Nagamaki from Dragon Sword, which is admittedly smaller
Mm.
by a reasonable amount, but also feels really nice in the hand. So like I think a Nagamaki can be done well, just
Yeah.
not just you know can't say that my experience moving a cold steel around is like the what I want to form the basis of my opinion on a weapon or a
I
weapon
think that's a
system.
healthy stance to take. Yes.
But yes, otherwise, generally longer katana. I've had a few really nice custom
Mhm.
pieces, and they can feel quite nimble and light and very very nice in the hand. They always have a heft to them, which
Mhm.
is kind of beyond what you would feel in a similarly lightly designed 26-inch blade. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know if I prattled on and actually answered your question anywhere there.
No, I was just curious since again the Miao Dao is obviously typically a larger class sword than a standard Uchi size, but it would handle, I'd imagine, a little bit differently than a similar sized Japanese construction sword than an Okatana
Yes,
or a similar sized Nadachi, which is why I was just a little curious. Since you said, again, you kind of felt at home using it, and I
right.
didn't
So
know.
if I do any kind of like downward diagonal strike,
Mhm.
just whatever system you're in, the
Mhm.
strike number one, right?
Queso. Mhm.
Feels familiar, right?
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
feels like I can generate tip speed. I can stop it with control. I can
Mhm.
stop it post target and defend. Um, and so all those feelings are very sword like, very familiar. At the same time, if I'm doing like an upward kind of
Mhm.
diagonal strike, a lot less common, then that's awful. I have to swing out from the side, otherwise I'm going to hit the floor. Big sword problems, and not something that is fun to do. So not great there. But most of the strikes that you're feeding are typically straight down or
Yeah.
kind of off to the side. And so if I'm doing anything else, if I'm thrusting, if I'm kind of moving with horizontally or in an upward diagonal motion, then all of a sudden it feels like a naginata, a little
Mhm.
bit. So I can hold it far enough apart where it's about shoulder width for me, and then I can deliver those strikes like I would with a naginata. And that feels very familiar to me as well because I study that as part of
Yeah.
Katori Shinto Ryu. So um, So anyway, yes, like it felt like I knew how to move it around a little bit. But the vast majority of things, like I could kind of handle like a sword. And if I wanted to extend the sword out and preserve the center line and kind of own that territory, it felt like I could do most of the things with the sword. I could move it around. I could deliver thrusts. I could parry. I could do most of the sword related things like I would with any other sword. Granted, there's some leverage and some other weirdness that you have to account for.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it felt very familiar.
Cool. Neat.
But if it were heavier, it wouldn't, because like the Maximilian did not do that. None of those things were true. Much shorter and a little bit heavier. So it's kind of a weird thing. Like, where does the weight, like where does it tip over the scale with weight or balance before you're like, I don't know what to do with this? Where, you know, I don't know. I imagine this is like the same thing with any other thing that you're talking about. Like, when is it a, you know, an SUV, and when is it a truck, and when is it a car? Like, how far do you have to go in one direction or another before you kind of tip the scales into something a little, you know, different?
Yeah, it's very interesting how you mention it, because a lot of time when we're doing classification of swords, it's often done just on how they look externally or what size they are. So when does a long sword become a great sword? When do you classify something as a back sword or a broadsword? But what you find when you're studying things historically is the opposite is true. In many cases, they would do their division of swords by their function more so than their form. So, for instance, I have discussions with Nick Thomas from the Academy of Historical Fencing, and he gets into the late 18th century definitions of what makes a spadroon. And they're very interested on a spadroon can be either double-edged, like the Civil War NCO sword that I have up here.
I'm familiar with two.
Yeah. So it's got a single edge in that case, but it's got a spear tip, and so spadroons could be either double-edged or single-edged. And they weren't so interested in what shape the blade had, but instead of how it handled. And so if it had a lot of weight at the end, it was considered either a backsword or a broadsword. But if it was very light at the end in the foible, that would allow it to be classified instead as a spadroon, because it was more important if it was suitable for spadroon swordplay, which means that if you just see a picture of it in a book or in a museum where you can't access it, you might not be able to tell if it's a backsword or a broadsword by the definitions of the users at the time. You'd actually have to pick it up and say, oh, this is really, really light in the tip and it can move around real fast. This is actually a spadroon. It's not a broadsword. And that might not be intuitive just by looking at it, even though now when we're classifying, all right, all the swords that are curved, they're sabers. All the swords that have two edges, they're broadswords, yada, yada, yada. And so just like you're saying, this Maximilian, oh, I'm having a hard time maneuvering it around. Maybe all those ones that are really cumbersome in your hand are great swords of war instead of the ones that you're going to be fencing with your buddies wearing, you know, silk shirts after church. And those are long swords because they're the type that you're going to be walking around with the burgers in town every day and fencing each other with.
I mean, that the classification makes sense, right? Because I can appreciate classifying a piece by what its intended use is. It is funny though that like in this attempt to use words to describe swords on the internet, like it's like, oh, there's always a perspective where basically anything you say is right and wrong. It could be like swords are basically farts. I'm sure that you can make an argument where that is somehow true, but then you could also make the argument that like swords should be classified based on use case, and the Maximilian would therefore, you know, like, yeah. There's no way to be right.
Oh yeah. No, I love getting into pedantic discussions. When I first got into it, oh man, I used to spend all day just arguing and no, you're right, you're wrong. I try and be a lot nicer about it now because there's so many different perspectives that everyone has, and it really depends on like what audience you're talking to, because everyone's coming from is going to come from a different background and a different understanding about what they have, what their expectations are for whatever type of sword that you're discussing. So just like you said, everyone's going to have a different idea for how you want to organize the swords, and that's okay as long as we have some way to communicate about
It,
whatever
it
gruesome,
usually like
stabby
doesn't.
things we are.
The vast majority of the time, I would say at least the questions that I get
Mm.
between like, what's the best $200 sword?
Mm.
Um, there's a couple that I would say are like better than others, but at the
Mm.
same time, like you're probably not going to notice the difference. Like in fairness, if I took the absolute best katana for $200 that I think checks all the boxes, and the worst one, well, not the worst one, like not helicopter of death safety
Mm.
issues, but like just above that, just clearing the bare minimum of like staying intact. A lot of people like aren't going to appreciate the differences between them, at least not initially.
Mm.
And it wouldn't be the same as like, here's the task I'm trying to do. And it's like, okay, well, you don't need a cleaver, you need a fillet knife. You're going to have fundamentally different experiences with the task that you're trying to achieve. If your objective is to fillet a fish and you get a fillet knife, you'll be like, oh, wow, look at how much easier it is. Like, I have so much more meat and like all of my fingers. And like your world will be different. And I don't know if that's always the case with like the swords. It doesn't seem like you're moving to a different experience fundamentally like you would be with a knife, at least in a lot of cases. But I could be wrong because a lot of katanas tend to be very, very similar. And that's where my brain is at.
And I think that that's true in large part because uh, for two reasons. One, because katana occupy so much of um, the the headspace when it comes to swords, especially with everyone's introduction to what type of sword. I mean, I'm sure that actually that's a lie. I do remember my very first sword. It wasn't a katana. It was a nasty fantasy European wall hanger that was terrible. I'm sure it shot its blade all the way across the backyard at some point. Um, but for the vast majority of collectors, the first sword they're going to get is going to be a katana. The late '90s anime craze was a very high watermark that we still haven't come down from. Um, and then number two, just like you were discussing, there is a whole lot of conservation in design with one Japanese swords across Japanese history, and then doubly so when it comes to modern reproduction. So you have all of this reduction of if someone just came to me without any other explanation saying I need a $200 or less sword, I'm going to pick a Ronin Katana and give that to them, and they're going to go home happy and cut a whole bunch of water bottles. I don't have to guess, like, are they asking for a small sword that they're going to practice fencing with? Are they asking
Joel,
for exactly? It's true. There's lots, just like you said, fillet knife versus steak knife versus what have you. There are tons of different swords from thousands of years of history from all sorts of different cultures, and they're all purpose built for different things. Look at the Nulu here from the Congo. They're built for very different purposes, but for
not for
most
Phil Martin.
people. All right, we got to get Phil to cut a tatami with an S-Talk or with a Kolishimard small sword. That'll be his next challenge.
I think he did one with a rapier once.
A rapier, I mean, there are some cutty rapiers out there. That I could believe, but if we could get him to do it with like a 400-gram a small sword,
But it
then
was a rapier from a Three Musketeers toy and a Happy Meal.
oh no,
that's why. Yeah, that's what you don't understand. All right, I will. You and me can go down rabbit holes dangerously. I will try to catch up with chat. Have you ever owned a Gladius? If so, did you like it? I had a Cold Steel one, and no. So short answer on Gladius, I have very, very little experience with them, apart from handling some Albions at shows and some stuff, I think at Arms and Armor, other vendors at shows. I have very little exposure to that one, other than being very angry at the Gladiuses that I've missed out on. Gladii, anyway, there's been at least 2 times one from Mark Morrow has come up, and it has slipped through my fingers, and I really like him as a smith, and I think his Gladius are great. And if you want one, go buy one. Albion does good, but Mark Morrow makes like the scabbards and stuff, and he's a cool dude. I talked to him about katanas a long time ago. He's like, I mostly make Gladius, and I was like, your katanas are awesome, and this is not even your bag. So anyway, I've had 2 of those pass through my. I had the opportunity to be like, I know what that is, and I want it, and then I just was like, hang on, let me answer this email. Damn it! And then
That's stores.
Yep. So, in short, no, but that's because I'm dumb and I have just not clicked the buy button quick enough. How about you, Andy?
No, no proper Gladi. I've handled some maybe in stores before. I have a Cold Steel machete Gladius, but I've used an actual machete for various things, but not a proper reproduction.
What is the katana behind you, sir?
This was recommended to me by a gentleman named Matthew Jensen. It is Ronin Katana $139 special. I forget what number it is. Maybe number 9. I don't remember off the top of my head. Maybe 13. Yeah. So you can take a look at it. And this is probably the easiest 130, 140 bucks that I've spent. It came. I have a review where I put this next to a Tachi that a friend had me babysitting from the Nanbocho period. So an antique from the mid 14th century, and this compares very favorably to the antique Nahanto. I have been cutting big thick dry bamboo in the backyard with it, putting it through its paces. It hasn't shown any signs of loosening up of anything. It's a nice workhorse beater for, again, less than 200 bucks. So this guy Jensen seems to know what he's talking about when it comes to recommending katana.
That was the first sword I re-reviewed it, but the Ronin Dojo Pro, or the RK series, the $130 ones, they were $100 back when I started.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time they were $100, and I reviewed that. That was the first video I think on my channel was for that sword. And then I asked Chris to send me another one because I was like, I think I do a better job making videos now, debatably. And he sent me some more to review. So
to destroy.
Yeah, I pushed it again. I think I broke it.
I think remember. You put one of those through a computer.
Yeah, that was the Musashi one. No, I did with the Ronins as well. Like I cut TVs in the backyard. Yep, there were some TVs that I cut with Dojo Pros. Yeah. So I have access to a fair amount of recycled electronics, and since they're usually going to e-waste anyway, I can further diminish their condition.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd show this to you. I'm not sure if do I have to clean it up. Maybe I have to clean it up a little bit. So this is again circa 2000, maybe 99, maybe 2001. I'm not sure, but it's a Hanway Practical walkie. So this was my first proper sword. Again, probably from the Paul Chen age.
The super original one. You got one after they refined it a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what year the first model came out, but it's in the only time that I ever did something even approaching what you've done. So I had this when I was young enough that I was hanging out with my college buddies, and although I don't drink, they wanted to celebrate, I think, the end of finals or something, and so they had a bottle, and they're like, "Hey, Andy, you're the guy with all the swords. Can you open this champagne for us? I'm like, oh, sure. How hard could it be to saber a bottle? Well, I just tried to saber it as if I were trying to cut through a tatami instead of using proper technique. And so I just absolutely took out the end of the of the cutting portion of the blade. And so I don't know if you can see it, but I had to completely reprofile the end of the blade. It still cuts wickedly sharp, but I had to completely remake the edge on the poor thing because going through a
Yeah.
champagne bottle will do it.
For
Unfortunately,
those unfamiliar, glass is harder than steel. So if you want to chip your edges and roll them, then cut into glass bottles. That is a thing. Thanks for joining Babylon the Great, new member.
Hey, Babylon.
But I'm great at chat and can read things good. What's this say? We had someone asking about Katana in the Katana subreddit about Hanway's restock on the Practical series, and I'm thinking about buying one, but they are
Out of stock.
Out of stock.
Always out of stock.
Yeah, so Cat Siberia is primarily a wholesaler and a distributor. So if Cult of Athena or whoever you buy swords from is showing in stock, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if it may well be that Cass doesn't have any in their warehouse, and they've sold them all to the other distributors that they work with. Good evening. I hope you're all doing awesome. I totally am. That's my
Nicholas.
voice. Looks like you guys are having a funny conversation. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your sense of humor, although I thought there was a question in there, but I appreciate the kindness.
We appreciate you, sir.
It's like, there's definitely a question in this wall of text. There was not, but Nicholas, I appreciate the sentiment.
We appreciate the sentiment, regardless.
All right. Don't try to trick me in my bad at chatness. Have you ever used a katana from Tokyo or Japan? Yeah, I have. Andy, you mentioned antiques before. Have you ever cut with one, used one?
I have cut with my own antiques very lightly. In general, I lean more on the conservation side of antiques rather than the get them shiny, bring out the angle grinders and then just chop up everything with them. For certain antiques that are in very good condition, I have used them for very light cutting. I will not do that with every antique, and in general, I prefer not to encourage people to cut with originals. But again, it depends on what I'm testing, and it depends on the particular antique. I have not cut with a Nihonto before.
I have cut. I don't think I've broken any. Mm-hmm. It's funny that I have to think about it. Like, did I break any antique? So I've cut with a fair few of them. There's people in dojos that use like Shinsakudo or modern made Japanese plates, which would certainly qualify under the terms. It does, not necessarily an antique. And I've also cut with some of the antiques if they're mounted and used.
Yeah,
I had a pile of wakizashis that I was pretty hard on that, like I bought for, I don't know, at the time they were like $130 on eBay. Mm-hmm. They still had a reasonable edge, but were kind of in a state of disrepair. And I took a little honing stone, keened the edge up a little bit, and then whacked some stuff with them just to see how they held up, and smacked them. And I would say the pushing test that I typically do, but to an object that was effectively garbage. And so I say that saying that, like, I looked at a sword, and for those historical preservation folks out there, there are a dearth of Japanese swords out there. They have been actively preserved. So we have the luxury of having a fair amount of easily inexpensive, accessible swords. And some of them are worthy of preservation by, the classification by the NBTHK. I think I'm saying that right. Anyway, there's some that are worth preservation and some that are not. And so if I can identify that it's, hey, this is probably a forgery and not one that's worthy of preservation, and I can easily spot the open welds or spot where the blades have failed, or that it's historically been in a fire and retempered, those things typically diminish the historical value of things, and then I feel a little bit more comfortable whacking things. So in those cases, that's where I've cut. I haven't like taken my, Smith of note, worthy of preservation kind of stuff and gone and whacked tatami mats in the backyard with it. Not to say I wouldn't, but probably wouldn't. It's more than
I
it
have
cost money.
a good friend of mine may or may not have done some backyard cutting with a sword that he thought was World War II era and is learning maybe actually Kamakura era. So it still needs to be properly researched, but it's an interesting story that's developing and I'm following closely.
It's that's a funny thing.
Yeah.
It's like you've been married for 20 years and find out your wife is a princess. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Well, what? Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, Nicholas is back.
Do you find there's a point of balance in front of the guard that just seems to make a wonderful feeling sword? I'll let you go first on this one, Andy.
Where's my Matt Easton context photograph? This is one of those it depends questions very much. I will say so. So my big thing is making these dynamic pictures. So we have this Josh Schwert over here that was, I'm sure Matthew has his own copy hiding somewhere.
I don't,
but
have one of those. I was looking at buying one the other day, though.
Yeah, so Peter Johnson and Vincent Chevalier have come up with this system that allows us to graphically represent many of the dynamic properties of the swords. And this particular catalog, the Sword Form and Thought, is a way for us to look at a whole bunch of originals that was showed in Solingen back in 2016, I believe it was. And Vincent has since gone ahead and made available for everyone the tools necessary to show how to measure your own swords to create these using the Weapons Dynamics computer. Again, someone named Matthew Jensen has taken the time to do this on a variety of swords that have come through his hands. And I have been so inspired by his effort that I've continued to do that with every sword that comes my way, and am making the dynamics charts that go along with that. And between all of these various amounts of data that we have, I can say that there's definitely a kind of range that you find for points of balance for historical swords. So there are certain sword families. So for instance, cavalry swords tend to have points of balance that are a little bit further forward from the guard than infantry style swords. And similarly, two-handed swords will have points of balance that are in a slightly different position than single-handed swords. So I'd say that rather than one specific point of balance, depending on what general function your sword will have, there's going to be a kind of hot spot that you're going to find where you want your point of balance to be. So if I had something like an arming sword where I'm going to use it in one hand and it needs to be used both in a dismounted and mounted position, then I'm not going to want it to be 25 centimeters out, and I'm not going to want it to be only 3 or 4 centimeters out. I'm probably going to want it to be 9 centimeters to 14 centimeters, somewhere in that range. And somewhere in there is probably going to feel good for that kind of use. I don't know if that helps, but that's my long-winded way of saying it.
I have a example-based way to say it, which maybe fills in some of the gaps of what you're throwing down there, because I don't know that I disagree with anything you're saying, but there's not really a way to well, first, context, yes. What are you trying to do with it? Because I think having points of balance that are customarily closer to the hilt on a traditionally made sword, where you're not trying to do tricks. I'll explain that in a second. Usually closer to the hilt is going to make you feel like you're in a little bit more control, like things are a little bit livelier, and that can often be more comfortable, but it may be antithetical to what you're trying to actually accomplish with the sword. And so in some cases, like if you are planning on hopping, I need a sword for motorcycle based combat, like you may want something with a little bit more heft at the outside, so it does depend. Cavalry swords customarily had a little bit different balance than something that you might duel with, and there were different requirements for longevity and durability and all that kind of stuff. So all that context in mind, I would just give a couple examples where people tried to cheat. The first that comes to mind was an angel sword, and I know the ghost of Daniel Watson is coming to me, but I like angel swords, so he's I kind of miss talking to Daniel, but anyway, the angel sword that I recall kind of made me think like, oh yeah, there is a limit to that. There was an arming sword, and he took basically a lead pipe and made the grip out of it and filled it with, I don't know, like concrete or lead or something. So the grip was this solid cylinder of weight, and it basically was just all pommel, right? And what it did is it brought the point of balance basically on an arming sword to the guard. And it was an arming sword that was similar to a Type 15 or Type 14. Anyway, it had a shape that would typically have a point of balance 3 to 5 inches up from the cross guard. And this one had a point of balance on the cross guard. And so it felt like you could do surgery with the tip, right? Like you knew exactly where it was, but it also felt like the sword was much heavier than it needed to be, despite being small. And usually if a sword is small, you kind of forgive the heft because naturally you are strong enough to just move it around. And I imagine this is going to depend on how big you are and all manner of other body types. But generally, like if it's a 20-inch blade, if it's a big fat kukri, like I still feel like I can kind of get the tip where I want it to go, and I could be reasonably effective in a thrust, even if it's off center or if it's really heavy. And so short things tend to not be as applicable to weight, except for this arming sword where somebody made a lead pipe for a handle and it added a bunch of weight that made it feel like, albeit controllable, stupid, heavy, and dumb feeling. And so, like, very controllable, it got it right on the guard, but then you picked it up and you were like, no. And so you can't always cheat. Flip side, the Hanway Oni Katana, really cool looking sword. I've had my public grievances with it, but it has a point of balance which is quite a bit lower. So the sword is like 3.5 pounds, and it's a katana, and that's on the heavier side of katana. It's kind of in the heavy category, but on the light side of the heavy category, if you will, at least in my experience with swords. So it was around 3.5 pounds, but it felt like a much lighter sword. It felt like it was probably closer to 2 pounds, 8 ounces. And that's because it's got a big long handle on it, and the point of balance is quite a bit lower. It's got a big old tang on it as well. So it feels like when it's upright in your hand, like, hey, it's a lot more nimble. And when you extend it out, it still feels kind of okay. But at the same time, when you try to stop it, you still feel that 3.5 pounds. And so you can't really, like in some spots, it feels really comfortable. But then when you kind of use it for its intended purpose, that weight is still there and it catches up with you and kind of give you a false sense of mobility that isn't necessarily there. So you do have to measure what you're trying to do. And there's not always a way to cheat with it as well. Generally speaking, though, I would say that in the event a sword has good dynamics and is not like it's not filling the handle with lead or kind of trying to do any kind of gimmicky thing to extend and bring points of balance down falsely without kind of tapering the blade or doing the more historical ways of making your sword feel better, then I should say, if it's not doing those things and it's making a traditional sword, then usually the closer the point of balance is to the handle, the more I feel like I like it. The more connected to my hand I generally feel, the more like I feel like I could poke you with it if I wanted to, which I'm notoriously bad at, or like if I was trying to slice you in the face, that I would at least get somewhere around your head and not like your rib cage or your hip or something. And the further out the point of balance is, the more I tend to be off with my aim when I go to cut. The harder it is to recover, the less fun it is for me to frankly move it around. But it could also be a boon to its intended purpose, like the heavenly horse from LK Chen, right? It's a long stick. I really love the Royal Arsenal dowel. That was fun. It felt like nothing in your hand.
Yeah.
And then you just make it bigger, and I don't like it because it's going to 7 inches out, and it feels unwieldy and weird, and it feels like I should want to poke something with it, but then my hand would slide up and I'd hurt myself. And so, yeah, but at the same time, it's a cavalry weapon, presumably, or well, could be. And if you're whacking somebody with, from horseback, it's probably a lot more effective at that than the one I mentioned earlier. So context does matter. I would just also note that there's not an easy way to like cheat it, right? You can kind of do something. You could maybe put a bigger pommel on. If you're competent or handy, maybe you could grind a blade and put some distal taper in where one doesn't exist, or attempt fullering if you're really ambitious or good with a lathe. But usually those options are not available to folks, and so you can't just stick lead in the grip and have it feel good, though. That would be what I would say. Which is not the question. Nobody asked, can I stick lead in the grip and have it feel better? I admit that is not what you asked. That is a random tangent that I went on. I am projecting. All right. Sorry. Hopefully that answered the question.
Great.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry, coughed into the microphone.
It's all right.
I thought I hit it. I didn't. Then I saw like, oh, light's not good. Okay. I've been considering a J-Co. I pronounce it. I don't know how to actually say it. I realize I pronounce it wrong. Sino sword, I think, is the other name for it. We'll go that way. Make an Unokobi Zakuri O Katana 31, 13-inch handle, Suka Tsunami, through hardened thoughts. Enjoy. Nothing inherent.
Sounds like a fun sword to me. What's your opinion on Unokobi Zakuri as a cross section, Matthew, yourself?
Yes.
You like?
But, so I don't find them particularly hard to train with, right? Within reason, sometimes vendors will make them really thin. So the spine on an Unokobi Zakuri blade is kind of cut back. And so in the event that you are doing habaki noto, so you take the habaki, and when you put the sword away, you put the habaki on the scabbard and then pull it forward and then kind of move the scabbard to put on the tip and sheath the sword. Well, that very swift, rapid motion, if the spine is almost sharp, is not comfortable, right? So if they're sharp, which typically they're not, but sometimes I've seen people make them almost like a false edge, and that's not great. And if they iris the tip too much, then it also becomes a little weird because it kind of rests on the fat of your hand as it rolls back. And so if it kind of almost recurves, what do I have that does that? Here's this knife. And so sometimes it has this little thing that goes sweep. And if I take this and just rub it on the meat of my hand, then I feel like it scratches. And so also not comfortable. And if you're going fast or you're trying to do a technique well, you can cut yourself. It can be not good, but appropriately made, I think they're beautiful. I really like the smaller kind of the enhanced ricasso section and the fullering that goes on there. The little sohi that typically runs up to the kind of where the yokote might be. All of those things I think are really good. It's very hard to do them well and can certainly be a sign of skill. And there's a lot of beauty that can go into the fullering and the additional details on there. So I like it when they're properly done. And when they're not properly done, they're still usually pretty light. The Romance of Men one that the Saruda, anyway, it was an Unokobi Zakuri through hardened blade. And it was very fun to move around. And it wasn't like, the fullering wasn't as complex and there wasn't, a nifty hamon or anything on there. It was a pretty bare bones and relatively inexpensive sword. But it was still light and lively and all of that kind of stuff. And instead of distal tapering, they just cut back the spine a lot and you still get a pretty rigid blade that holds up well for cutting and feels, kind of nimble and agile in the hand. I
don't consider myself very up to date in the JSA community or the Nihonto community in general, but to me, just my perception for being kind of on the periphery, it seems to me like this has become more popular in recent years as a blade type. And my impression is that kind of what yours is, that as long as it's done well, it's really quite nice. But you can't always get it done, executed the way it should be done. So we put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't always. There's a variety of sword shapes out there, and I believe most of my historical knowledge is not scholarly. So this is kind of like he said, she said, I heard in the locker room kind of stuff. Just that to preface. But as I understand it, the Unokobe Zakuri is like a cut down naginata, and so cut down naginata may have been used as wakizashi, or they could have been used as swords. We think of naginata as kind of a particular shape. You might have a vision in your head when I say that, but some historical examples could be very, very long. And so some of them were cut down, and that's where some of the Unokobe Zakuri geometry blades came from. And then it caught on fashion wise, or people were like, oh, that's pretty. And so then they started making katana in that geometry. But I don't think, unlike the Shobu Zakuri geometry, that it was like a direct response to a threat that needed, it wasn't a problem that needed to be solved as much as a fashion statement, from my understanding. Right. So that may be why I like it, because, I'm not above nipple tassels.
Yeah.
Because it's just it's pretty. And so that, if that's why they made them historically, then I dig it.
It's working.
Yeah. All right. I imagine this one is for you, Andy. Where did you get your sword channel name? Where did it come from? If you said that, I already apologize.
My sword, I'm Dlatrex, of course. Haven't you been following? That's if you type that name into the internet, that I'm the only place where that comes up. But it's been my handle since 1998, I'd say. So been using it for quite a while.
I just Googled it, and some weird foot stuff comes up, just so you know.
Yeah. I probably should have done a better job of scrubbing my history before letting everyone know.
I'm trying to find another question, not put in an odd Shatner pause here, just so we're clear. What are we going on? There was a question somewhere. Mini Katana is a marketing company that also sells swords. They're professional media peeps. That's not a question, but I think it seems to be the top. Have you heard of Mini Katana?
I have. Haven't been very impressed by what they have put out as far as social media is concerned. They seem to be a importer of Lanchuan, mostly wall hangers. I think they have a limited number of sharps, and they seem to be making a tidy profit for themselves. They do what I would call TikTok business. My good friend I Post Swords has put out a couple of videos trying to make folks cautious about some of the way that they represent their wares in media, which I think I would agree with pretty much everything he has said on the topic. To Mini Katana's credit, they have responded to him and have even taken down some of their more erroneous claims from their website about some of their products, such as that their sharpened blades were suitable for sporting combat.
Yeah. So I've recently got some samples from them, and I do recall Sebastian, or I think that's Ipost Swords' name. Right?
It's Sebastian. Yeah.
I remember he made a video about it, but I get asked enough to check them out, and they were gracious enough to send a few things over.
Yeah.
At a glance, I could tell you, I like them. Now, you have to bear in mind that I get asked to review or to give an opinion on any website that seems to pop up that sells swords, right?
Sure.
So Dakamakashitsu sword company pops up on the internet one day.
Sure.
Hey Matt, what do you think about this? I like all the swirlies on it. And it's really tough to say when you like see something that looks like it kind of comes from the same parts bin. You don't know, but every now and again, like I've been wrong. Dragon sword, for example, or now Shadow Dancer sword. I can't remember. They changed the name. Anyway, when they said, hey, we're going to send you some samples, and I looked at the website, I was like, these don't particularly look impressive. And then I saw them and I was like, oh shit, there's a little bit more under the hood here. The mini katana stuff is also kind of, they're not the same as Dragon Sword, admittedly, but I had very low expectations and they are exceeded. Like all of the stuff is honestly not bad. Let me back up, right? Because there's I think a few points that you made, like, hey, they're not a sword company, they import stuff. All right. Like I don't effectively, so does Cast Iberia, right?
Yeah.
They don't make it, they import it from
forge
they work with. So there's a lot of trusted companies, I guess I would say, that have not the same model, but like also are importing things from places they buy from. And sometimes they're a little better known, sometimes they're not. The marketing, yeah. can't like it's I have to like where I struggle with it, because like there's a part of it where it's like I'm just not the audience, right? It's just it's not for me. Like I went on the channel and I checked out a few things, and there was a young guy that seemed to like cutting with swords, and he was smelling like a rotted milk container, and I was like, it's just not, clearly this is not for me, right? Though if I were going to smell a rotten milk container, now would be the time to do it, because I can't smell anything. But anyway, they also have, I don't know, way more subscribers than I do. So they are working, like if the method of advertising on YouTube and transitioning that into product sales, like they're way more successful at it than I do. And I think like some of the things they have are kind of cute, like buy more swords, they get lonely. Like I was like, yeah, that I'm going to tell that to my wife. It's like, this one's lonely, it doesn't have a dancing partner, and that's why I bought more of them. You bought 15, Matt. Like, shut up. But at the same time, like I'm not sure exactly what. I could certainly see the way that they market, how something could cross the line, give somebody a false impression, that they might, I don't know, like do something that would violate the terms of good sorting people. But when I looked at the website after getting samples, it seemed like if they have a rat tail tang, they call it that. And like in the videos that they make, they're like, these have rat tail tangs and they're not good for hitting things. Saying any sharp sword is good for sparring. Yeah. I'll back up though. When I was in Filipino martial arts, I remember doing seminars, and there was a guru who would talk about practicing with live blades, right? So here's a guy that does Filipino martial arts, and he teaches other people Filipino martial arts, and he's welcomed enough in the community that like people invite him to seminars and stuff, right? I know that depending on your martial art, that doesn't mean a whole lot, but anyway, he's like, hey, wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but if you're trying to develop a like a practical skill, like I can caution you all day on the dangers of practicing with a live blade, but I can't caution you enough about never doing it and like never having that element of danger there. I can't say I've ever practiced sparring with a live blade sword. I think it's a little different if you're using a knife and you can just be like, nope, and like kind of fuck off distance is quite a bit easier. Still very, very dangerous, but I would say that like the idea that you would practice with a sharp sword seems absolutely bananas to some people, but it's certainly like a live idea in the martial arts community, albeit a narrow one, but like it's not like bananas, right? Like people, if you want to have a practical skill, you might practice with a live sword. I don't practice kata. Well, no, that's not true. Kumitachi is with live blades. If somebody's swinging at me where they might kill me and they're not like in very cautious, total control of the sword, no, that's also not true. Sometimes when I'm making a video, like I'll have stuff on and there'll be live blades out, and I've done some stuff to see like how edges bind and things like that. But it's usually in like very controlled Nobody is going to try and kill you. We're all aware and like hyper conscious that there is a live blade out here, and that like the business ends are pointed at each other. And so there's a lot of trust in your partner. There's a lot of trust in like their ability and yours. And you're all trying to like learn something and not die. Right.
Right.
But the point is, like, I think a lot of people are really quick to be like, don't do that. I don't want to make excuses for them. At the same time, like, it seems like a lot of people spaz out about it. So like a 2-year-old could hear you and then get the wrong idea. And it's like, well, I don't know, like natural selection should be allowed, right? Like I'm not sure. Like that the cold steel marketing, for example, way back when.
I was just going to say, doesn't this remind you a little bit?
It was just kind of cool, right?
Steel?
But the people that were like, yes, that was definitely the same day, same sword. They definitely didn't have to straighten it or sharpen it, and they just cut through 1,000 pigs in one sitting, and that was it. And that's just how it worked. And so, I just must have gotten a dud, since the one I got needed to be sharpened out of the box and bent really easy.
Right.
I don't know. There's an element of kind of false advertising, which is not good, but then like also everyone's like, I'm the best. And their website, at least when I saw it, and that could well be because they've acted on feedback, but when I looked, it didn't seem like any of their copy was egregious. I didn't see any of the stab your friends, I didn't see any of that. And I saw in particular, like, calling out, these have a rat tail tang and they're ornamental only, and these do not, and they're more fun, and you should buy those. Like, it's like, yeah, that's good. And then, I was like, I did see like #1 viral marketing, or #1 viral, I don't know. They said #1 something in like viral swords. And I was like, well, I don't know of any other sword video that has 7 million subscribers on it. So you're probably correct there. I don't, but anyway, all of that, I can see how it would absolutely have a bearing on your decision to buy stuff. But at a glance, they are surprising. I've just been looking at the swords themselves, and so I have a few different ones. There's an anime sword, which is painted, but the paint is on there in such a way that it's like a really thick coating that would allow you to cut something, which is better than I expected, frankly, for like an anime kind of sword. It's got all the problems that you would expect to find in a sword of its price. If it were a sword, I can't remember which one I have. It's I don't know. It's one of the anime ones that's got eyeballs all over it. And if this sword were sold next to, the Ronin Katana, right?
Yeah.
I think it's probably about $150 too. The Ronin Katana would be a better sword to buy. Absolutely. Sure. Ito's tighter, fits better for training, for cutting, all of those things. But if you want a sword with eyeballs on it, like, it exists, and it's not really that much more expensive. So I thought that was like kind of cool, because if I want to buy a Princess Bride sword, there's shitty replicas on eBay, and they're $500 and they will fall apart immediately. So here's $150 and it won't fall apart immediately, but it's also not great. Okay. There's a next tier up sword that I have with them, which is sitting behind me. I'm working on reviews and stuff for it. I think it's $550, somewhere in there. And when I saw it, I was like, all right, these are going to be ridiculous things. And then I got them and I was like, oh shit, they're actually pretty nice. Like, reasonably tight. The fittings are put on there well. The features they have are like really kind of braggadocious and zazzy. Again, just not for me.
Yeah.
But like the hamon is really pretty. It's reasonably well put together. So that's the next one up, I guess, is they have some real swords. They're about $500 and they're pretty solid. The polishes are not as nice as the $500 Ryan sword that I had.
Right.
But the handle construction and the fittings are actually nicer than the Ryan sword that I had. So and the hamon is actually more interesting, but the polish is not as good. Anyway, you have to kind of pick your poison, but I was surprised at what was in the box, because I liked it once I started practicing. And then they have a $1,000 sword. And the $1,000 sword, not sure, but some speculation here. If I hold up my Zisei katana that was sent to me for review, which I didn't break because I can keep it out and compare things. They're very similar, right? It has a Suba that was sent to me on a dragon sword, and it has a scabbard, which is similar to the Zisei sword. It has a polish similar to the Zisei sword, and it has Ito wraps and all that kind of stuff. That's a bit of a mixture between the dragon sword and the Zisei katana that was sent to me for review. And when I reviewed the Zisei sword, it was $900, and I said, it's good. Like, if you want a sword that's polished well and pretty and has these features, this is not bad. It's not a super indestructible sword. It is a well-polished one. And this one is $800. Like, it's cheaper and has basically the same stuff. And then for $100 more, you can get a folded one, which was quite a bit more expensive on the Zisei website. So, and the polishing and stuff looks very, very similar, but it's really well polished, has a really lovely hata and really lovely hamon, and it's less expensive. So, like, if it's the same sword, if I said it was worth it at $900 and they're charging $800 for it, like, I'd kind of be a dick to be like, I don't like your marketing, like, well, I wouldn't. It's fine for me to say that personally. I would just say that, like, I have to give credit where it's due.
Right.
$1,000 sword that they have, which is really there's two. One's 900, one's 800. The $800 one has basically all the same features as the Zisei katana that I reviewed, but it's $100 cheaper. And the $900 one is also like all of that, but better fittings and folded. And so, like, it seems to represent a pretty solid value. And then I've been playing with some of the other anime stuff, and, like, just for the fact that it exists, like, it's goofy and weird, but, like, it exists. And I went and used Japanese tatami and kind of didn't try to break it, but try to do dumb stuff with it, and it held up.
That's
and then the last thing they sent me was this stupid knife I brought out earlier, which is, like, I was like, all right, I don't test knives very often, but fine, Joe, I should send this to you. I've been daily driving it, though, and it's this, I don't know if this is going to show up in my dumb, here we go. Is this coming through?
Yeah, it's coming through.
Okay, so it's busy,
but
I've been driving it, and, like, it actually, it's like, it's busy and kind of goofy looking. When I saw it, I was like, oh, the blade's kind of okay, but I actually really like it. Like, it's kind of well thought out. And so, like, it doesn't have a belt clip, so I have to put it in my pocket. And I was like, what the fuck is this tassel thing? But then, like, because it doesn't have a belt clip, this little thing sticks out, and it's actually how I deploy it, and it's always in the perfect position, and it's actually really solid. And, like, it's the little swoopy tip on it, which I thought was dumb, is really handy for opening boxes, which I've been getting a lot of. Like, it's really kind of, like, it's really good.
You want to hate it, but you can't.
I'll admit, going in, my expectations were not high. And I had seen photos, and I was like, all right, like, it seems kind of like the same part spin stuff. And I don't know if fundamentally it is, but I don't see something that is dishonest to the customer. And it seems like what's being delivered is, again, considering that, like, the people that are being marketed to are buying an anime sword. So, like, you don't have to deliver quality. Like, I think they'll probably be okay with not. That's not an excuse not to, right? Like, and so I'm just happy that at least the things that I see seem pretty good. It could be, like, just the reviewer thing, they could have sent me some cherry-picked examples, but I don't think so. And they took some risks, like sending me this weird dragon knife. Like, I don't review knives, and it's kind of fantasy, but I gave it a fair shot, and I was like, God damn it, like, it's kind of actually like it.
Well, I'll say this much. Everything I've seen about mini katana, and again, I kind of started with all of the kind of, if not horror stories, all of the things that gave me pause. Every step along the way, I have seen that they have tried to make progress in the correct direction. Like, I've been given the impression, so you made the comparison to Cast Siberia, where if you're talking about a wholesaler like KOA or what have you, where they're doing wholesale in the United States but getting their stock from international, those folks, you can still talk to them and they seem to understand their product really well. But the impression I've gotten from Mini Katana is that despite all of their interaction with them from a media standpoint, when you end up with those type of comment on their webpage, at the end of the day, they still don't really understand their product very well. They're still new to the game, as it were. But they seem to be taking what feedback they're getting and acting very quickly on it. So that to me says, again, they're obviously in it to make money.
Do
Just
you
like you
think
said,
they
we're
don't
not gonna,
understand it, or just
yeah,
they use it different?
perhaps. And again, maybe it's a different crowd, it's a different audience, but they do seem to be trying to go in the right direction, if you will. If that makes any sense. They seem to respond to
Yeah,
feedback, which is more. It obviously could be completely different, and we could be having a different conversation, as it were.
that's fair. I I struggle with this because like there's when you see people in putting people in jeopardy or or throwing out false information, it's pretty easy to be like, nah, I don't like that, right? And I could certainly see how, hey, it seems like they don't like. I would think the same thing. Like, do you not understand swords? What are you doing? At the same time, swords are cool. Like people,
They are
generically like them. They're kind of a neat thing. And so if you don't fundamentally understand the product, like what do they have to understand it like I do, or like you do, or like somebody that like who's a god figure to us, like Phil Martin or Peter Johnson or something?
well.
Is that the
So
I think
this
either
is the
one of
thing.
those gentlemen would object to being put on that pedestal, but
I don't know if you saw it the other day, but myself and Kyle and I think Keith put out a PSA talking about how we need to have a little respect for swords just in how we use them, because at the end of the day, they're dangerous. You've talked yourself before about how it's very easy if you're using them improperly to hurt yourself. And so they are cool, but you need to show them adequate respect. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself hurt. And so part of what you're saying is, do they not understand them, or are they just talking about them differently? If you're marketing, let's say, and this is reducto ad absurdum, but let's say you're marketing to 13-year-olds and you're saying, buy my sword because it's the most awesome toy you'll ever get. You're effectively marketing a lethal weapon to a 13-year-old. And if you don't put a certain amount of safety precaution in there, then there's a little cause for concern there.
At what point is it a person's responsibility to know better?
Yeah.
There's a train of thought that I have. So if I separate it, right?
Yeah.
Hypothetically, you're looking for an ice bath. Okay. I know I'm hard right. Yeah. You're looking for an ice bath and you're like, all right, I'm going to go online and I'm going to see like, where can I buy it? Do I just get a big pot, put some ice in it? What do I do? Is there a way to keep the ice? I'm spending a fortune on it. My fridge doesn't make it. My wife is mad because I can't keep frozen pizzas in there. It's all filled with ice. So you go online and you're like, hey, somebody is saying, hey, buy this chest freezer, and then just fill it up with water and sit in it.
Yeah, it's true. Can't save people from themselves, right?
Right. Now I say that because that is a real fucking thing. Yeah. That is a thing that is happening. My day job may or may not involve some things related to this, but there's some people that are like, hey, this is a great idea to fill up this chest freezer with water and then just turn it on. And then it's basically an ice bath, but it's not made to hold a moving human being. And there's like stuff in there that could kill you. But somebody could easily go out and be like, hey, there's a bunch of chest freezers that aren't selling. I'm going to buy them. I'm going to sell them on my new ice bath website, right? Now, in that case, you would, you'd be marketing a product for something that it is not designed or intended to do, right? And I guess I haven't watched the website enough, so I don't know if they're like, hey, kids, grab a sword, fence your friend, poke him in the eye. What's the worst that could happen? Like, I don't know if it's like that, what's going on, or is it just because at least the examples that I saw, and I watched some of their most popular content, was like how to clean the sword. They didn't have any, particular respect for tradition, like you strike it 3 times and
Yeah,
then
no,
you
no,
pray.
no.
Like there's none of that. But it was like, hey, here's how you clean it. It seemed okay. And then in using it, like you don't probably want to sniff like random milk things or, sneak up behind your friend, but men do dumber things. I don't know. Like I didn't see anything that was inherently marketing to 13-year-old. Also, I'm a big man baby, so like it's kind of like, are you marketing to a 13-year-old or a grown ass man? Because there's not a huge difference.
You're speaking facts.
Anyway, I sound like the excuse train here, and I don't mean to be. I'm just trying to question now because, like, hey, the products that I got, I kind of thought that, like, in watching this kind of stuff, that it just wasn't for me, and they probably sold stuff that was made from the same parts bin, and I didn't necessarily see a value. But then in looking at it, I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this Hamon, or like these fittings are from a parts bin, but they're much less common. And this seems like something that I thought was worth more money, and they're selling basically the same thing for less.
And I'm very happy to hear your report, and I'm looking forward to your reviews of it. This is good. I'm glad to hear their catalog is a little bit more fleshed out than perhaps I was led to believe, because I haven't spent all time looking at their website. So we'll see. Mini Katana perhaps has a longer story and trajectory than expected.
Yeah. What's the it's like we're all having scholarly conversations about swords, and like, hey, swords with distal taper, if the point of balance, and and Mini Katana comes in and is like, hey, you want to see me make a helicopter with my dick? And we're like no, kind of. Like I don't know. Like I don't know if it's just like a weird. Anyway, I kind of like that they're making people interested in swords. I like that. But yeah, I have to look more at where the concerns are. But
go on Discord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like there's definitely some angst out there. But like if I separate brands, like there are even brands that universally seem to do things well have haters. There's not.
Sure, absolutely.
I don't think you can be. Yeah. I mean, I don't think like I don't know that I've really mentioned a whole lot of facts about myself on the internet, but I make a joke about it. I get told to die from cancer of the ass a lot for somebody who really only talks about swords on the internet, right? So like, I don't think, they're balancing out like where are the legitimate concerns and where are they not. Anyway, if somebody has some and you don't want to talk about it in chat, or you have, and I'm just not observant, feel free and ping me in a PM or something and let me know all the dirty secrets. Anyway, at a glance, I went on a tirade about Mini Katana, but that's also because they sent me like 10 things. It's like, okay, well, it's a lot of videos to make.
You're gonna be a much needed objective opinion here on the topic. So again, you're serving the community well in your role.
The weird one is, you can probably see it just in the back here, this yellow thing.
Yeah.
I can't say the name right. It's Pluck or P-Luck. I can't remember what I said, but I whacked it into a tatami mat a lot. Like, yeah, it's an anime sword, but it like,
all right.
But I think back to the original shitty swords that I had, the first swords in the collection, and like you, it may surprise people, my first sword was not a katana, but it was some Toledo, Spain wall hangery thing.
Yeah, there we go.
It didn't even like have a rat tail tang. It had a nub with a little button on it that like locked in, and it was just kind of pressure fit, and it could thrust, but beyond that it would come out. So it would just fall apart, and the handle would be in your hand. So yes, that was like the kind of cheap swords that you had available. And like, if you wanted, God, I don't know, like any kind of movie sword, if you wanted like the idea that you could basically buy a well-made sword in the form of like whatever media you happen to resonate with. Just was not like, and have it not be a complete piece of shit. It's just kind of baffling to me. Lucky kids these days. All right. I can stop talking about mini katana for the moment until I have to make a video about them and watch myself talk about them for hours. All right. Did I miss questions? What's going on? Did I stuff? Agreed. Never heard of minis before now. Curious concept. Could that be done well? But is it on any level?
I think that's just a follow-up to the mini katana question.
I managed to refinish one of those Toledo 440C Highlanders to cut tatami and bamboo after a couple months of work on you. I heard some of the original Highlander katana made from Marto were like 1045 and could be finished in like
really
like decent swords.
Huh.
But
that would be fun.
It gets to a question that I think may be worthy of asking you, Andy, and that is if you could have manufacturers change one thing, you know, or you don't have to limit it to one, but if you have one, certainly that, and then like what sword do you wish was made, like that was a product on the market today that you could get?
If I could have manufacturers change one thing?
Yep.
Like across all types of swords, you mean?
Yes, you can. You have a magic wand, and your will can be done.
I mean,
granting one wish, limited to the sword market.
Well, it would probably just be to ramp up production, because the biggest issue I have is I'm trying to find something and it's out of stock or has been discontinued or what have you. So to just keep everything perpetually in a state of production, so to accommodate my wills at any time. Some of my favorite swords, you know, I'm having to track down, and they've been out of production for 15 odd years. And why did it have to have been popular, you know, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? And now only now have I learned about that it was already produced and stopped being produced so long ago. And then, I'm sorry, what was your second question?
What sword do you wish was made? It might be a good follow-up to the one that was made 10 years ago. What do you
well, all right. So there's lots of areas that that I think, so, you know, Matt Easton is doing a lot of stuff with his Royal Armories line and covering gaps that up until now had not been occupied. Similarly with LK Chen. So like some of the stuff LK Chen has done is basically creating a market for a sword type that didn't exist. So, you know, we could produce our 25th Viking sword, which we have so many of, or no one is asking for Song Dynasty Dao. Like, it didn't exist before. And all of a sudden he's making Song Dynasty Dao, and people are like, that's a really cool looking blocky chopper. Sure, I'll go and buy one. So that's the sort of thing that I think needs to be done. So since I study swords from a historical point of view, to me it's almost always first going to be some type of a historical design, and then secondary to that will come swords from media. You know, who doesn't love a good film sword or what have you? So it would have to be some form of Eurasian saber, since my pet area of study is the earliest type of sabers in their infancy and development. So some type of long Turco-Mongol saber that's probably over a meter in length. So something with like a 34, 35 inch long blade and a tiny little single-handed grip, like you would find in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have a couple good surviving ones.
That's an interesting one. I've only seen like a couple oddball Mongolian sabers, and I don't think they've been 35 inches long. They're usually little stubby things.
Well, so that's the issue. Right. So if you see something that's called a Mongolian saber, they often have horse motifs. They'll have like a horse head pommel or horses on the Hosho, the guard. Those are, again, Mongolian styled, and they're usually Republic era or 20th century reproductions, and they're based on what was being used in Mongolia from the Qing dynasty onwards. So they're really just effectively Chinese sabers. We have very few surviving example from the Mongolian period, from like the Genghisid conquest period that we can attribute to like the 13th century. There's a couple from Russia and one or two from Eastern Europe that have been found from areas where the Mongols sacked, where we have surviving blades, but they tend to be very long and very thin. It's an area of my personal research. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that does sound neat.
Yeah,
there's plenty of historic swords that I've wanted to play with but haven't gotten a chance to. Shashkar one in particular that I would like to play with. Those always sound neat. Mongol sabers I've heard things about, but like I have less conceptual idea of what they look like, so I'm less keen on it. I wish there were more ornate rapiers. Like if I go to a museum, there's really profound works of high art that come through it, like the kind of little nuanced detail that you see in Japanese style fittings existed in some of these rapiers, like the silversmiths that would put the works together, and the blades had kind of elaborate fullers or holes or spots in them and stuff like that, and kind of complex geometries. And I'd love to see things like that put on. Also, like a nice compilon, that would be nice, just because I'm partial.
Oh yeah.
Trying to think of what other oddballs from history seem to be underrepresented. Yeah, but that's fair. An Ainu blade would also be kind of fun in the Japanese realm.
Oh, that would be a very unusual blade to be represented.
So they exist, and they're usually like cruder looking, I think, but like, I mean, effectively they kind of blend in with katana, and people sometimes confuse them, as far as I understand, for like crudely made or poorly made katana.
If you had one made, you'd have to get the accompanying baldric to wear it properly.
Yeah, it'd be. I don't know if they always did. Were they always in like a baldric of some kind?
That seems to be the most common way, because I've never seen one worn through an obi, like a standard uchikatana is worn. Yeah.
But that's another one where it's like it's like that's a big part of Japanese history, but like nah. And so but they had swords, and they were neat, and so it'd be kind of fun to see an example of one of those.
I know of one friend who's a smith who's interested in making an earlier style, one of the warabite toe that have the kind of canted up sort of grips to them. They're very early Ainu style swords.
On a completely different topic, how is the My Little Pony katana going? Haven't caught you live in a while. Okay. There is an update, and it has to do with the company I was talking about before. I can't tell you if anything is going to happen or not, but I was talking about ideas with the owner of Mini Katana, and just some of the projects and stuff that I have going on. And the My Little Pony katana came up. There seemed to be a little bit of interest around the My Little Pony katana. So I have struggled finding somebody to make fittings that can work. And admittedly, I haven't dedicated as much time into shifting to a different pony in the thing. But the idea was that I would move to a different one that my daughter liked, that would have a similar, a more subtle paint scheme. Some other folks have reached out to me and like given me some designs of Suba and stuff that would potentially work. But I have to bear in mind, like, basically what can be cut out with a water jet, because effectively that's about the only way that I could keep costs down. And then like what will maybe blend well and not go off theme if I use like a more generic Fuchikashira. And then where can I buy jewelry to use for Manuki that are reasonably cost effective? And so all of this is to say that I have to use basically like $14 tchotchke from eBay on a what will be $2,500 sword. It's kind of like, or I can spend another $2,500 in getting somebody to like really make like high-end, you know, custom Fuchikashira Minuki Suba. So I'm struggling with it, but so some other folks may take an interest in the project, and it may go a totally different direction. And if somebody decides to make a katana that is not, you know, that falls in line with the designs that I shared earlier, I would not be opposed to it. So I'm not, in the event hypothetically something comes out someday that looks a lot like the thing that I made and was like, isn't this ridiculous and full of rainbows? Awesome. I hope you get to it. Then it wouldn't just be me that got to enjoy it. It could be some other people. So maybe there'll be some other company that takes over the initiative. I have not abandoned the project yet, but I am struggling with it because I also have like 7 other blades that need to be finished that I actually want and that aren't kind of like a running gag. So it's still on the table for me, but I will admit I haven't done it. Plan still is to move to Twilight Sparkle is the pony's name. Do the purple, magenta, maroon kind of theme, I think. And then the Suba, I think I can take out, and there's somebody sent me a design. There's like a few stars and stuff like that. And effectively, if it were done, it would kind of just look like a purple katana, and it wouldn't stand out as like, this is a My Little Pony sword. It would be subtle enough that if you went to the dojo, like it just looked purple, which is a little off, but like not egregiously so. One of the sensei at the dojo that I have is a deep purple saya, so it wouldn't be, I mean, it'll stand out, but not like, this is one of those mini katana things that I was talking about. It wouldn't stand out more than this does. And I trained with this the other day. And like, what do you got tucked in your obi there, Matt? A Rolex? So I think it'll potentially be a little bit more subtle. That's the way I'm leaning. And if you're a My Little Pony fan, like you'll spot it, like you'll know what's up, like from a distance. But if you're not a My Little Pony fan, you won't be like, dude, you're wearing a My Little Pony katana. And it's not really in an effort to hide it, but in an effort to make it analogous to the character that it's drawing inspiration from. I have to move from the Rainbow Dash character because I can't get a Suba that looks like a butt explosion. That's basically what's going on. I can't do it. It doesn't work with the water jet cutout. If I do, then it's going to chew your hand up like you might as well put like like invert a table saw blade and have it like around your hands. It's just not like, I can't find a way to make it work right and still be something that I like. There's a lot of ideas where I could make something, but not something that like, I wouldn't feel like it feels like any idea that I'm coming up with for that character that can be made is like a mockery. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make sport of somebody who enjoys My Little Pony. I'm trying to make something that would genuinely be of interest to the people that do it and pay respect to the characters. So yeah, that's tough. That's tough to do right on a budget, even a budget of like $3,000. It's tough to do. So
now, Matt, since my daughters are going to ask, is this going to be Unicorn Twilight Sparkle or Alicorn Twilight Sparkle? Do you know the difference?
I don't. I'm sorry to say.
Does she have wings or does she not have wings?
So if at least the you wouldn't notice because Twilight Sparkle won't be on the thing. But if it were a matter of wings, and that makes a difference, I imagine that could probably be integrated into like the stencil work on the scabbard. So if I were to keep in line with the theme that I was going with, and I had to somehow put in wings, I would have a base coat of black or something like that, and then stencil out so that like wings or like the profile of them showed in the scabbard work, which would be painted with the kind of the base colors of Twilight Sparkle. And so I think you could integrate either way. The unicorn thing would be a little trickier to do. It's like wings are, I'm not sure. And then otherwise, they basically just have a mon, and like nobody knows what all the Japanese mon are, and some of them are pretty out there. So Twilight Sparkles could easily be a Japanese mon, like it, not easily, but it's not as far a stretch as you might think. If I put some of the cutie marks from My Little Pony on a scabbard, and I was like, which one of these is from your daughter's anime versus a historical Japanese mon? Like a lot of you would fail more of that than you would maybe be happy to admit. I believe that's the Ashigaru clan. No, that's Derpy McDerpy. Like that would be what would happen. Don't test me. No, it might not. Anyway, I did not know. My daughter told me Twilight Sparkle was the other one, but I don't know if she's the winged variety or not. In fairness, though, the Rainbow Dash had wings. I wasn't planning on putting wings on it. The plan was like very rainbow colored blue base coat, and then the character does this like sonic boom kind of thing in the show, and so I thought that would be a really good Suba. And if I could find like a, I wouldn't even have to like integrate it, but if I could get some sort of Kashra that looked like the face of the pony, like exploding out from that sonic boom thing, which is in the show, and then tie it in with the Ito and have it be like reasonably close colored and put like rainbows everywhere on it. Then it would kind of go in line, but the paint and the like it's just not going to happen. It just won't. So there's a way to make it cool. I can't get it done. I can't get it done. So anyway, that is, every time somebody asks me about the My Little Pony katana, I go on like a 20-minute spiel about how I've made no progress. But I do have a Suba design that I like, thanks to, again, somebody who donated their time and art skills, because I struggle with it. And that's something I kind of want to reiterate about the My Little Pony side of things. You would not expect there to be a huge overlap in the I like swords and I like My Little Pony space. It definitely is. Some of your closest friends might be My Little Pony sleeper agents. They might be bronies in disguise. Just a shame to admit it, which is a bummer.
Or they could have daughters.
They could well have daughters. But the people that have reached out to, so I've talked a lot about sword projects and things that I like. I mean, you probably expect I have a Mitsudome tattooed on my asshole. Like I have shouted from the rooftops about, nobody's ever sent me a design of like, hey, here's a way that I think you might like to see them. Nobody's ever done anything like that, right? But I mentioned My Little Pony and like wanting to do a good job. And I've had a fair amount of people reach out to me with ideas and saying like, hey, here's what I think. I listened to your stream, and maybe you're thinking about the character a little off, or like here might be something that would work or is approachable, or you mentioned manufacturing, like maybe this is a little bit more doable as an idea. Genuinely trying to be helpful, and not like your idea is dumb, I hope you die from cancer of the ass, but like I thank you for trying to like respect the character. Here's some heartfelt ideas of things that I would love to see mixed, and they were genuinely helpful, and also gave me like hope that there would be people that would genuinely be interested, because like I did not think there was like a shared group, but there absolutely is.
The Venn diagrams we occupy are sometimes very interesting.
You would not have thought. You would not have thought, but absolutely, they do overlap, and are super friendly. Like nobody was like, hey, here's my ideas for My Little Pony, now send me a picture of that dick, like nothing. Just genuine, nice, kind, like thought out efforts put in, ideas, no weirdness. Like I wish somebody sent me some Mitsudome pictures, like like it's about like some weird project that kind of happened on a lark, and that like anyway. Yes, so I no more. I gave you too many mental images in that last rant. I apologize. All right. I suck at chat. I'm moving. If I missed your chat, I'm sorry. Where I've built a Slayer themed katana. Any questions? Ask Flea Markets has the best non-conventional Manuki. Yeah, I'd imagine Flea Market if you built a Slayer themed sword. I've seen some cool themed swords. I've also seen like a Nihonto exhibition that was built on like anime. I think it was like Evangelion or something, where they made some Nihonto, like traditionally made items out of, then did some nifty things. Anyway, I think we can hear you, Andy. It seems like his AirPods died, so hopefully you can hear us. Or he can't. Andy's struggling. I'm going to mute Andy for a second while he figures out his stuff. We'll see. Did you win? No, he's still gone. Oh, I cut him off too quick. You're good. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Yep.
Sorry.
You were clicking and clacking for a second, but we're winning now. Inner Geek would love a functional reproduction of the Princess Bride sword. I always love the rapier, even though it's short compared to... Yes. I would like a not screen accurate replica of Inigo Montoya's rapier. That would be neat. LK Chen, you hear me? You hear me, LK?
I know at least one of the movie swords was on display, and it was one of the gag swords where the blade was collapsible halfway down the middle of it. You could see where the blade would separate, and it could be used for skewering. I'm not sure if it was Count Rugen, presumably because the fight on the Cliffs of Insanity, I don't think has anyone getting stabbed. But you could see that the hilt, unlike the hero sword, which is used for the close-up that has all the gems and stuff like that, the hilt, it just looks like it has like tennis tape or friction tape on it. So it's meant to be used for like fencing and stuff like that. So it's always interesting to me whenever, once upon a time in a different life, I thought it was going to go into practical special effects for movies like Rick Baker or Stan Winston or something like that. And I'm always interested that they will make, 4 or 5 different swords for a film, something nice in steel, something in rubber, something that's got a gag, something that's just a hilt and sitting in a scabbard and doesn't pull out with any blade in it. So whenever someone's like, or sometimes I'll be studying a prop sword in order to do some sort of a comparison, and I might look up a prop from a film, but which prop am I actually finding? Is it polyurethane? Is it steel? Is it aluminum for fencing or what have you? There might be several official swords from a given movie.
Swords in movies are fun. I think of the Highlander where the cap broke off in the last scene.
Yeah,
it's in the movie.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones where he's riding and the sword is
the sword's flopping around.
There's a lot of good stuff.
There was one recently I saw. I don't remember if it was in Vikings, but they made it on screen where the sword ended only about halfway through the blade, and then it either had a striped tape or just was green, and it was obviously supposed to be added by CGI in post so that they could use it for slashing through someone's torso or the like, but somehow it didn't make it past the editing room. Someone was holding a nub of a sword.
Be wary of my nub of doom. See, I got the voice to pull it off right now.
Yeah. Here, Matt, since I didn't show it to you before, this is a saber that would not be unlike what would be found during the Mongol period. This is the saber of Charlemagne, one of those discontinued swords I had to track down, and would be a Magyar or Hungarian period sword from around the 10th century.
Is that the guy from the Metallica song?
Exactly.
Okay. I'm pretty sure Bird just started headbanging in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, would you ever do a technique video? Oh, man.
What's your
25
favorite
Ways to Disappoint Your Teacher by Matt Jensen. That's I could do it like Stuart from Mad TV. Look what I can do. Like just yeah. Just, I don't know that. I think the best I could do would be stupid shit I do that you shouldn't do. That would be fall right in line under my debatably crappy fixes for various katana related problems video I made. Well, yeah, I could do a video on technique, but there's a couple things you got to bear in mind about technique. One is I'm not a teacher in any of the arts that I study, and so they get really mad if I pretend to be one, right? So in Katori Shinto Ryu, which is one that I study, I can tell you I study Katori Shinto Ryu, and that is it. I can talk a little bit about some things, like where are classes? Where do I study? What are some things? But I can't teach it, I can't show it, and I can't explain any technique. You know, that's something they call out as like, nope, don't get to do that. And they say that right at the start. So I can't really show that, and I can't explain it, and I can talk about some concepts that I've learned. Like when I studied the art, I was like, huh, that's kind of a weird way to move a sword. And then I put on armor and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. You hold the sword in like such a way that makes sense when you're wearing a bucket on your head, you know, like it all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that is my range of motion with how this armor works. I can move my shoulders here, but like I can't do that. Like this part is anchored down. So there's some things that I can maybe like talk about a little bit without explaining the technique. The other is Toyama Ryu. They're quite a bit more forgiving about doing stuff on camera. So when you see me do kata on camera, that's usually what it is. And but I'm still not a teacher. So if I'm like, hey, here's how you do these techniques, they'd be like, hey, asshole, don't. Like, it's not the same thing, but like it, you know, pretending to be somebody in the military when you're not, or you know, it's not a title or an honor that I have. So I don't get to do that. But what I could share would be like, hey, when you see me cut through stuff, I overswing. So does everyone else on the internet. Don't do that. Like if you want to be helpful if you're making a video, it's helpful to see if you can control the sword enough to stop after you cut through the target and get back to a defensible position. And it's hard to do and a useful thing to be capable of. So as you're practicing, maybe something to think about. There's like things like that where I could say, here's where I'm disappointed in myself as I see a video being done. And here are other things that may be useful to conceive of in the realm of swordsmanship and cutting and how you can maybe get things out of it. Like draw lines on your pool noodles, right? If you cut once and you're like, neat, and then you cut one and lose half your noodle, and you're like, I meant to do that. Draw lines on the noodle. You can't cheat yourself then, and it's a better use of your dollar. If things like that would be useful, then I guess I can make a video, but it wouldn't specifically be about like, here's how you do this kata. That's not something that I'd have to make one up, and then that would just be a joke. What about you, Andy? Would you do any kind of technique video?
So if you are not qualified to teach, that's doubly so for me. My formal training is a smattering of Kenjutsu and Kendo from more than 20 years ago. My background is mostly in Japanese martial arts. It's primarily in Jiu-Jitsu, but also a little bit of Bujitsu, Judo, and Aikido. And then a lot of play at home HEMA, and been getting into following some online instructions for Chinese martial arts recently. Like I'm most comfortable probably with 19th century military British swordsmanship, Roeth and the like Angelo and the like. But again, I would never consider myself qualified to teach anyone, and anything that I could do, I could easily point you to someone else online who could instruct you far better than me. So just like like Matthew suggested, I could show you exactly what I am doing poorly and how I might go around correcting some of those poor mistakes. But I would never presume to teach, especially fencing. I'm a backyard cutter. I have limited experience. I've shared recently some footage from maybe 2002 where I did some sparring with one of my buddies in the SEA, where I had a big shinai and he had a rapier, and we did an East versus West match. But that's about that type of stuff. It's about the extent of my fencing career. So I don't consider myself a swordsman that you could learn from if your goal is to learn swordsmanship. And so until I start practicing with any regularity at a local school, which I don't anticipate anytime in the near future, I don't think that my channel is the place where you're going to find a lot of actual fencing lessons, unfortunately.
No, if you want to see a guy with a 5 head, be very wordy, like I'm paid by the vowel, talking about swords on the internet, I'm your guy. But
there you go.
You want to learn something pragmatic? No. No, I'm afraid not. But somebody had something good to say here, like Matt's guide on what to cut up in your home theater. That I saw that comment in there. That accurate, yes, very, very accurate. The meteor hammer. Somebody's a little obsessed with the meteor hammer. I suspect this is a hammer.
It's actually a weight on the end of a long chain. So you could think of it kind of like it's more like the end of a kasurigama or a very long nunchaku. So it's a heavy flail that's used in. We have it being used at least as far back as the Ming Dynasty and possibly further than that. Very interesting type of weapon. I don't know how much it was used in a military context, but certainly in kind of militia, civilian sort of settings. It's one of those things where you can coil it up and stick it in your pocket, and so you can carry it around like that. Do
you think there's a chance there's like just an asshole that they didn't like, and they'd be like, no, take this chain, you won't knock your own teeth out, and like there's just some yokel that ended up in the military, and they're like, no, we're not going to give you a spear, Dale, because you keep stabbing me in the ass. You get this ball on a chain. Go fuck yourself, Dale. Throw it at the other guy.
Wrong.
Pull it back. Throw it again. Okay, you're least likely to hurt us. We're not giving you a pointy stick. No, like I don't, because it seems like those are like you see people that are really awesome at moving them around, right? Like I've seen the ball, like in kung fu demonstrations in particular. There's people doing all manner of ass whooping with the
Yes.
So okay, like I get it, but I don't know.
Is your opponent going to sit there for 20 minutes?
Martin can cut the tummy with a spatula. It's neat, but if you give him an actual sword, it's still better. Like, so give the master like a better weapon, and I bet he's going to be more deadly. But is this like, are these like flails on a stick just because like you're hoping Dale knocks himself out so he doesn't whack you and poke you in the butt with a spear? Is that what they're for?
There's about a 5-minute talk explaining why we have things like that, and it has to do with the end of what happened in Qing, China. But you're about 30% of the way there, I'd say.
Okay.
No.
Well, that's further than I thought I would be. That was just me bullshitting right there. That was total. Just pulled it out of my ass, and I was like, that seems like something. Like if my 3-year-old was like, I want a sword, I'd be like, this is a sword. Here you go, buddy. It's a ball on a stick. There you go.
So if you'll humor me for 1 second, the short version is like the goal of martial arts is martial arts as we think of them in the dojo that you can go into in the strip mall down the road, is not to teach people how to defend themselves or even attack someone else. The goal of a martial art is to perpetuate itself and to keep it continuing with a successive legacy and not go extinct. And so all of, for instance, the Chinese martial arts that we still have are the ones that survived, and the ones that didn't survive all went extinct, mostly in the late Qing, because in the late Qing, all the martial artists were all associated with thugs and ruffians and warlords and people who generally were high on drugs and thought that they could do superhero powers and had god complexes and all sorts of weird stuff. And the martial arts that have survived today, in large part, were very showy, very spectacly, very good for demonstrations in the middle of public squares, and looked good in kung fu cinema, etc. So there's a huge survivorship bias, and they also needed to be able to attract new members in order to be able to pay for master's salary, etc. So you had to be able to go and put on demonstrations in the middle of a village square, get lots of new recruits, and hold out your hand and get coins, etc. So the techniques that you see are intentionally very good looking and very gaudy and not necessarily what you would think of as very pragmatic. And as a result, you're only seeing a very thin sliver compared to what you and I would consider the military or martial techniques. We do have surviving examples of those written accounts for the military manuals that we have from earlier dynasties, from the Song, from the Ming, from earlier Qing, from the Green Standard Army. And they look, as you could expect, very different.
Okay. That makes sense. We're trying to kick ass with ventriloquism. Like that.
So, I mean, there's still elements there. They share a common language, but they've kind of gone in different directions. You're talking about the difference between like speed cycling and dirt biking. Like they're still doing the similar things, but the presentation is very different.
Yeah. Your family will be disappointed in you in either way. But
there you go.
Okay. That's I see. It seems like one is a branch off the other, though. So martial arts that focus strictly on the application don't have any need of showy or propagating, right?
Yep.
Because the purpose is train soldiers to kill, or a group to kill, and not legacy. But if that is the goal, then like that's we're going to do that through ventriloquism. We're gonna okay, yeah. I get what you're throwing down. I don't think that was 30% of the way there, though.
Maybe I gave you too much credit.
Totally different thought process. I was just like, I was thinking there's like, everybody's like, no, all able-bodied men. And it's like, but you said body, not mind. Dale's really dumb. Anyone here named Dale, I'm sorry, I'm using that as the dumb guy name. I'm sure there's plenty of smart people named Dale, or at least, I don't know. I haven't met any, but I'm sure they exist. So yeah, like I'm thinking we have to bring him because somebody in charge said so. We can't fire him because then they're gonna, burn the village down or something. So we'll give him this ball on a stick, and then like he can pretend it's a weapon and he won't accidentally stab us. He'll probably just knock himself out and we'd be better for it. Like it's not quite the same thing, but
I'll propose this alternative history to the Scholar General. We'll see what he thinks about it.
Yeah.
Chinese history. I can do maybe one more question.
Here's your experiment. Find somebody named Dale, give him the ball and a chain, and tell him to attack, and just see what happens. And then you'll have put some wind beneath the wings of my theory. Okay. Yes, I know we are running out of time. So maybe I can turn it over to you instead of guiding the conversation. Is there any topics that you would like to address? Questions you would
I've had so many questions for you over time, and now that I'm given a carte blanche, there's man.
Yes, it's real.
No, it's definitely got here. What if someone was coming out with a new sword? What is going to stand out about it that's going to attract your eye? What's it going to bring to the table that's going to attract you? Because something that I like, and part of what draws me to your channel, is we're in some ways very complementary with our collections. You have a lot of you collect a lot of sword types that I personally do not have or do not collect. So it's you provide a lot of information to me that I'm lacking. And so that's always interesting. So to me, it would be very interesting as to what would be new that would come out that would make you say, ooh, that's something that I'd be interested in picking up. What would a manufacturer do or produce that that would make you interested in picking up a new model of sword?
That's a very good question. And honestly, specifically to make me go out and buy it, that's become overly challenging when people load me down with more than I look at for free, you know. So that's a tricky one.
What a problem to have, my friend.
And I don't know that I honestly have an answer for that, because I feel like it would have to be something I would use, right? So something more Mitsudomi than I have ever seen before that is going to improve my experience doing EI or Tamashigiri, or somehow marries both worlds together in one thing that makes me carry less things to a class or to a seminar or some such thing. And so I mean, it's possible I could certainly find something that's interesting, but at the moment, like I have one for every day of the mood, outfit, color. You know, if it's rainy, I can change my sword. You know, like I have one for every possible use case at the moment. So I'd have to think of a new use case for me personally. But if I maybe take a step back and say, like, what would draw my attention, and say, hey, I'm interested in that. Can I borrow one? Can I see one where I would actively go out and be interested in at least spending some time with it rather than parting with my coin, right? I think anything different, and it's really hard to stand apart. I would say that, like, marketing doesn't inherently do it. Mini Katana, to bring up them again, they have a really profound online presence, but until people kind of said, hey, what's up, I can't say that I was curious about anything. I thought I understood the product offerings that they had. I'm glad that, like, I pursued it and looked a little deeper, but you know, the like kind of novelty of it and the different offerings that they have in terms of anime didn't do it, even though they advertise it differently and arguably better, at least, you know, based on numbers, right? Where I have been interested has been steels. I tend to say that, like, hey, the steel doesn't matter, but I'm certainly curious when somebody says, hey, this is made out of, you know, this magic steel that's going to do this magic thing. And sometimes it seems like a bunch of bullshit, and sometimes it seems to bear fruit, right? There's been absolutely cases where the Beiser, you know, now Cloudhammer, when they reached out initially and said, hey, test this S7 sword, you know, I dare you to hit it on that croquet stake of doom in your backyard. Like, that got my attention. I was like, oh, okay. Then nobody's like been like, hey, we want to see what happens when you beat this against the metal pole savagely, you maniac. Like they're them and Quinn Waterfield are the only two people that are like, yeah, I'm curious what happens. Show me. So there's that. The steel type can certainly be interesting. I'm also interested just in, like, pretty things, right? Like if it's zazzy or cool looking, or you know, particularly like a really accurate historical representation. I would say that is what made me curious about LK Chen, is that these were like the Albion Museum line, right? Like it's supposed to be a prettier version of what that museum piece would be. A lot of what Arms and Armor makes are things that are replicas of the Oakshot collection, right? So you can be like, here's the new one, and here's the one that it's based off of, and they're like molds of the same guard or something like that, right? So those I absolutely find interesting, and that LK Chen saying, hey, this Chujen looks really awesome and has like all sorts of curves and grooves and, you know, neat looking stuff, but is also historically representative of things that would have existed, is also really, really interesting. But that's because people weren't doing it before, right? What doesn't draw my attention is like, hey, I'm making a sword and it's got the same parts bin, right? And it's cheaper. Or You know, like I don't mind looking at it, but I'm not inherently curious about it. Like, oh, this sword is made from the same parts, but it's $10 less. Like, I'm not inherently curious about that, because the time it takes me to make a video and answer the question of if it's the same, I'd rather just pay the $10. Like, I can't say that in and of itself is a driver. It can be. Evolution blades are really expensive, and so being really expensive, like, I'm kind of curious about, are they really good? You know, so price can be a driver, but it's usually like, if they're really expensive, do they justify it, rather than
Right.
they're really cheap, are they okay? I don't know. They can be, but things that just stand apart. So if you make things that have unique or interesting fittings, if you make something that is historically accurate in an underrepresented category, if you make things out of things that nobody else does, if you make them better than other people do, or differently, or with different materials, in such a way that they just stand apart, and like, I can clearly identify in a lineup of swords that this manufacturer made that one. And if I can say, like, this manufacturer made that one and I've never held one, I'm very, very curious. And I think you could probably do that. Like, if I lined up a Type 18C from every manufacturer that currently makes a Type 18C, a lot of people in this room would be able to point out which ones are which, you know, and they might know why they're more or less expensive. They might be curious about them, like, and they'd all kind of probably be a little different. But in the katana realm, if I try to look at a 28-inch, half-inch Sori katana, and I take every manufacturer currently making one, that list is going to be hundreds long, potentially, of not every forge making them, but every manufacturer that lists themselves as a brand. And the differences between them are going to range profoundly. Some of them are going to be really, really close at, you know, you may be able to confuse them. Well, they would be Nihonto, because like Tazando is connecting you now with Anti. So there'd be a very long list. Some of them would be genuine. Some of them might blend together or look better or worse. And a lot of them are going to just look the same. And I won't be able to pick them apart, and they won't have anything characteristically unique or special about them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but just something that stands apart that I haven't seen. I don't know if you do you like go out for hamburgers with your family, or watch like, I don't know, is there anything else that like would inherently make you curious about a hamburger, or something that you've had like 1,000 times? It's like, this one's got the cheese on the inside of the meat, and it explodes in like a fiery goo down your throat. It's awful, but I'm curious. Like, I want to try the Juicy Lucy. That's a hamburger from Minnesota. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not special. You've had cheese on meat before, but when the cheese is in the meat, like, it's a gimmick that's like, I want to try it for some reason. I don't know, something different.
Something different.
What I can say something that I would be curious about. I have seen it done on, I think SBG sold one that was like this, but I see laminated swords, and I see folded swords, and I see through hardened swords, and differentially heat treated swords. And it seems like what I don't see is laminated through hardened mono steel swords. So if I look at the cold steel SRK knife that I have, it has a Sanmai through hardened construction, and I can make out that the core is of a harder steel, and the outer edge or the panels are of something else, and they're through hardened, so you get resilient. You know, I don't know. It seems like there's a better way to take care of or combine steels to have interesting characteristics that benefit each other across the realm of swords. I don't know if I trust anyone enough to like heat treat it well enough to make a difference, but it'd be neat to see a through hardened blade that was laminated and that offered some sort of actual performance benefit to a customer.
You're talking about on a katana specifically, right?
Yep.
Okay. Because I know that one of my buddies has an LK Chen Jian that's a laminate that's through hardened, to the best of my knowledge. So,
yeah, like it can be done, but I would also add the like does something, right?
Well, that's the point. He has an example. So he specializes in Jianfa, And he made a point of writing back and explaining to them that the Sanmai construction is so beneficial to the target cutting. He's working with thick bamboo, that he was hoping that the new model that they're coming out with, which is a Qingjian, that he was hoping that they'd offer that type of construction for that blade, because right now I think there's only 1 or 2 blades that they offer it for. And he's like, hey, this is really a big performance improvement over the other models of Jian that you're offering. Can we increase the number of models that you can do that type of steel with? And so it's something that they're looking into, apparently.
Yeah, if it had a performance benefit, all for. And that would be where I don't know, right? I'd almost want to like have like the base model through hardened, which tends to be extremely durable. And I'm not a metallurgist. I don't do anything with them, but it sounds like there are different steps that you take to heat treat different metals. And it's not as though you heat them necessarily to the same temperature or cool them the same way. And so there can be different steps. And naturally, if you're combining 2 different metals with different properties and, you know, different steps to unleash the potential in that for sword use, I don't know, there'd have to be some kind of magic science behind it, you know, some sort of real thought behind what are they combining and is it beneficial? And then I'd honestly be curious if it offers any benefit, because inarguably to me, the through hardened varieties are like any loss you suffer from edge retention is more than made up for in the fact that like you can do really dumb shit with it. Like, and I say that from the standpoint of, if you are a samurai fighting another person in armor and they turn their head and you whack their helmet instead of their face, your sword is fucked. You know, like I whacked a helmet the other day, it broke. I kind of wasn't expecting it. Those helmets are pretty durable, even like the reproduction quasi ones now, which are probably not as durable as they were historically. So the likelihood in a battlefield scenario or anything that involves a sword that you would encounter somebody that does not want to be stabbed and puts an obstacle in your way is high. So, the through hardened variety seems really good. It seems like the 1060, or I think it's T8 that LK Chen uses. There's a bunch of like just generic steels that every manufacturer seems to favor. Some of them are slightly different, and they all seem to hold up, you know, reasonably well. Some a little bit better, but like, you know, if you think about the steps I take, where I go and throw them at trees and whack them into poles, like if you can get to the part where I start hitting a metal pole, like you've kind of survived a little bit of the battle. And so I'm just saying I want it to last longer. I don't know why it takes me so long to get to a goddamn point, but I would like to see the 1060 $100 variety of that sword be outperformed by the inevitably more expensive laminated through hardened version of that sword, and have it be a meaningful difference in like the longevity of the sword. And if it offers, honestly, even like maybe it's just not for me, and like the edge retention coupled with the more you know, the survivability of the blade, but is kind of intermingled with the edge retention, maybe I wouldn't pick it up like somebody who's cutting a lot of bamboo. But anyway, I'd like it to be useful for something.
Sure. And
I don't know that it is. That's I suppose the.
That's would definitely be something to experiment with. But I too am no metallurgist.
What about you?
All of that science to the Smiths.
What would you look for
in a new sword?
Yeah, what would draw your attention? You mentioned history.
I'm still at the phase of my career where I am trying to learn more about how different types of sword handle. So rather than pick up, let's say I like Langsmesser, rather than pick up 6 Langsmesser, I'm going to pick up an arming sword and a saber and a Burmese da and what have you, because I am trying to, I like the kid from Pokemon who uses the Pokedex and is able to immediately identify any type of Pokemon that it finds. My goal is to be able to see a picture of a sword and I'm pretty much immediately know, okay, it's from this time period and this culture and was used in this sort of context. I will die probably before that happens, but I'm still trying to figure out how, like, what is the sword trying to tell me? And so again, it's from the perspective of the historical use of the item. So my goal is foremost is historical fidelity for it. So like have the red over here is this is my really nasty scabbard that I made for the messer from Langsneck Emporium. It's
Better than I could do.
Model, huh?
Better than I could do.
Yeah, but for instance, so that messer, a lot of people wouldn't like it because it's got funny looking angles and it's got hammer marks on it, and you know it's got all sorts of little touches from where the guys worked on it. But to me, it's gorgeous. Not only does it function perfectly well, but it's also very faithful to how messers of the period were made for the people that would buy that sort of messers. They could have made higher quality messers, higher status messers, because messers in the middle 15th century did subscribe to a variety of different classes. But it serves my needs fine. And some people, this is unacceptable, and other people, like myself, think, oh, that's perfectly okay. And so that is great because it serves my needs wonderfully. It's a pretty faithful representation of what a period sword would have looked like, and it's at a wonderful price for the quality of the craftsmanship that it generates. Again, obviously, I'm a sucker for LK Chen. This Kilich here is by Passeri Handicrafts, and again is of amazing value for the quality and fidelity that he does for mid Caucasus region blades, Persian blades, Mamluk blades, Ottoman blades.
It's got some Shashka too.
Yeah, again, if you want a Shashka, I basically can't think of a better guy.
Talking to him about one like a couple days ago, so it's
it's perfect. So that's kind of like my first step as to if you're going to try and sell me on a blade, you would probably have to show me what research you're basing it. It's like, okay, well, where did this come from? What are your sources that you're basing it off of? And then it's just a matter of if I can afford it or not. Because there are some beautiful swords out there that I absolutely cannot afford, unfortunately. I have some outstanding commissions that are tying up all of my sword funds right now, unfortunately. But
there are that is a thing. I look at the stuff by Patrick Barta, and I'm like, I don't even have to like the way it feels. It's so pretty. Like just that's so neat. There was every now and again there's just one that like you're like, ooh, I can't remember what it is. It's the Vorpal that Peter Johnson made. I've seen it. I've seen videos or photos anyway. I for some reason just really like the way that one looks, but I imagine, if something like that were to come up, because he started making I can't remember what his the art pieces that he's made recently are from. He had a collection of them.
The Vision line, I believe.
Yeah, but they were like, more than $20,000 or something they were selling for.
That sounds about right.
So that is like, would you like a car that will survive the winter or a sword? Well, not right. It's not even like you're not going to be sword fighting. And this one you'll be scared to look at because it's
that's that's the issue. You get something that gorgeous. I'm still at the stage where if I buy a sword, I'm going to want to swing it and cut stuff and do dumb things with it.
Where's your limit? How much money would you have, like? How much would you have to spend on a sword before you're like, I can't use it? I just
I don't think I could right now. I mean, let's put it this way. To be honest, I think it would probably have to do with the materials that went into the sword. So I have most of the swords I'm buying are going to be, below $1,000. They're going to be,
okay.
900,
But
800.
hypothetically, Lord Peter Johnson and Phil Martin burst through your door like the Kool-Aid man, and Peter Johnson says, "I have made for you, smelted from thine own Liberty Bell, a sword. It's made from your own people's history. Are you going to go in the backyard and cut with it?"
If it was Peter Johnson, I would probably cut with it at least once, just because I know the way that Peter manufactures his swords.
But it's also made from the Liberty Bell.
I know.
You're going to cut with that piece of American history?
Like, I don't know that I could bring myself to cut with
the correct answer is you hand it to Phil and he cuts with it.
Yeah.
Give you an easy out.
He would cut with the bell in the state that it's in.
Well done. Well
he
done.
Would cut with the wide end of the bell.
Yeah. I hear he invented bells. That's
no. I mean, if someone gave me a $10,000 sword, I don't know that I could bring myself to cut with a $10,000 sword. But it does depend a little bit on, because by the time that they're $10,000, there's usually a lot of decoration and ornamentation going into the blade and a very high level of finish, which means you're usually going to damage it even against a very light target. So, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. So commissions can be expensive just because of the research that goes into making them. So even if the sword is not necessarily gorgeous, even if it's a robust, strong blade. So I'm having a sword made that's going to be around $3,000, but I'm going to be okay using it as a functional cutting sword, because it's going to be a strong sword. It's rather expensive to produce because a lot of research and time is going into faithfully reproducing a specific sword from a specific castle. So there, it depends on which sword, I guess is what I'm saying. If it's any $10,000 sword, I probably won't cut with it. But if it was a $10,000 Peter Johnson sword, I might actually cut with it, because his swords are generally very faithful to original swords that often were meant for doing stuff more than just sitting on some king's wall at home.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
I would only think about if I want to sell it or not. It's really, do I want to drive the car because it devalues it? Not do I want to drive it?
Yeah, that's true.
But fair. All right. Well, I know you said one more question, and then we went down, I think, 3 more rabbit holes.
That sounds about right.
Yes, that is. I have a feeling that we could go on quite a while on various tangents related.
There'll always be another time, my friend.
There will. So we can call it here and bid you all adieu. Thank you for joining me for this random ramble session.
My pleasure.
Thanks to chat for keeping things lively and entertaining, throwing us questions, and also being forgiving for the fact that I continually neglect you and don't get to all the comments. But appreciate it all the same. Hopefully it was entertaining. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Take care.